Good evening. I'd like to call to order the City Council meeting for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for August the 14th, 2023. Would you please stand as you are able and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Would the clerk please call the roll of the members?
Rachel Hulteen.
Present.
Leah Dozman.
Here.
Mr. Scott Owen.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Here.
Janice Hoppy.
Present.
Amanda Weaver.
Here.
Judy Hutchinson.
Here.
And I know that Valerie is joining us momentarily. Mr. Mayor, all 8 members of the council are present. We have a quorum.
Okay. Thank you, councilors, all for being here. In your packets, you have some minutes and study session notes. We have the City Council meeting minutes of July 24. We have special study session notes of July 24 and study session notes of August the 7th, all of 2023. Are there any changes or modifications to be noted in the notes or agenda or meeting minutes? Seeing none, we will let those stand as presented with a thanks to the clerk. Are there any changes to be noted in the agenda? Seeing none, we'll proceed with the agenda as provided. Thank you. We will now go to our public's right to speak. Members of the public may come and speak to council for 3 minutes on any topic that is not on the agenda. Agenda topics, if there is public comment, we will happen at that time that they are introduced. We also have a special study session this evening to talk about parking and changing and charging for electric vehicles and bicycles. So if you'd like to speak on that study session item, we will do that right now. So I don't have anyone from the public signed up to speak right now, but if you're online, please raise your hand in the virtual format. If you haven't, and it looks like we...
Mr. Mayor, we have one person who has her hand raised, Dawn Underwood.
Okay, Dawn Underwood, would you please unmute yourself, and we'll make sure you're unmuted, and give us your first name and your last name and an address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the council at that time. Dawn Underwood, we saw that you had your hand raised, and I want to see if you're able to unmute yourself and that we've got you unmuted. And if you can hear us, I can.
Oh, there you are.
Okay.
Council members, thank you. Sorry about that.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question in regard to agenda item number 2 regarding the possible sale of the Bank of the West to Jefferson County Housing Authority. When speaking with neighbors in Lepler Manor.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes.
We are going to have a public hearing with regard to that item, so we will take comments from the public at that time, and I'd like for you to wait, if you would, and hold your comments until we get to that agenda item.
Sure.
And so if you'll hold on, it shouldn't take us too long to get there, when we will call for hands at that time and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that's either online or in City Council chambers that would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll close our public's right to speak. We'll go to item number 1. This is our consent agenda item. And Councilor Ohm, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mayor. Motion to award the 2023 Mill and Overlay Project to Martin Marietta Materials Incorporated of Lakewood, Colorado, and approve subsequent payments in the amount of $1,969,977.80, with the total contingency amount of $157,598,020 for a total not to exceed amount of $2,127,576. At issue, the 2023 Mill and Overlay Project is being overtaken to provide repairs to roadways in need of corrective maintenance Streets included with this project were identified by staff and evaluated for effectiveness of this particular treatment. Also included with this project was some striping and signage to install on-street walking paths to serve as safer routes to school for school children. 7 bids were received for the work in response to an invitation to bid. Staff recommends awarding a contract to the lowest responsive bidder, Martin Marietta Materials Incorporated of Lakewood, Colorado, in the amount of $1,669,977.80, plus a staff managed contingency of $157,598.20 for a total not to exceed of $2.217,576. Item number 1B, Resolution 39-2023, resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement by and between the County of Jefferson, State of Colorado, City of Weaver, Colorado, regarding the production of a mailed Tabor notice concerning ballot issues and the administration of their respective duties concerning the conduct of the coordinated election to be held on November 7, 2023. At issue, the City of Weaver will participate in a coordinated election on November 7, 2023. The attached resolution and intergovernmental agreement must be executed and forwarded to Jefferson County by Tuesday, August 28, 2023. The documents refer to the respective duties of the county and the City of Weaver concerning the production of a mailed Tabor notice concerning a ballot issue that will be submitted to eligible voters of the City of Weaver regarding the administration of the coordinated election.
Thank you very much. This is our consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve consent item number 1A and 1B, please?
Yes, I move to approve item 1A and 1B.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Councilor Mayor Pro Tem Stites. Would the clerk please poll the council?
Please cast your votes again. The machine is cantankerous today. Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed unanimously, assuming Councilmember not, yes, she is.
Yes, she is.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you please reset the timing lights? And we will go to agenda item number 2. Councilor Hulteen, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce Council Bill Number 18-2023, an ordinance approving the sale of certain property owned by the city located at 7575 West 44th Avenue. At issue, the city purchased the Bank of the West property located at 7575 West 44th Avenue in January 2021 for right-of-way required for the Improve Wadsworth project. After the necessary right-of-way was dedicated for the Wadsworth project, a remnant parcel of 15,435 square feet and a structure remains. Foothills Regional Housing has made a request to the city to contribute this parcel for inclusion into the Ives Affordable Housing Development Project. Section 16.5 of the city charter requires approval from 3/4 of the entire city council to sell municipally owned property.
Thank you very much. This is an ordinance on second reading. It is a public hearing. It is not quasi-judicial. I am going to start the public hearing. And Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation on this item?
We do. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our guest this evening, but the issue statement is our staff presentation for now. We'll be here for questions, but Amy Case with Foothills Regional Housing is here this evening to provide a presentation to City Council on their request.
Thank you, Manager Goff and members of council. My name is Amy Case. I'm the Chief Real Estate Development Officer for the Jefferson County Housing Authority, also known as Foothills Regional Housing. I appreciate the chance to discuss the site identified for potential sale to Foothills Regional Housing with you. I'm going to just kind of go through some of the basics, sort of the who, what, when, where, and why of our ask tonight. And we definitely will talk a little bit about who we want to serve with the Ives development, but a little bit just to sort of remind you who the Jefferson County Housing Authority is. We are a governmental entity. We are not profit motivated. We are publicly and transparently governed, and any success we have with our investments is reallocated into our statutorily directed mission to benefit the affordable housing stock and needs of Jefferson County residents. So with that, what we are talking about doing here is adding, hopefully, a second phase to our current development on the corner between 44th and 45th of Wadsworth. We've already broken ground on a 50-unit multifamily complex named the Ives One, and we would like to expand on the workforce and subsidized housing available on that site with a second phase. This will be a little bit different. It'll be able to accommodate some larger families. It will have some 3-bedroom units. We think it has further benefits of helping the city meet its goals of Wadsworth Forward Design, reinvigorating Applebacher Park, and as well as providing some, as I said, deeper subsidized units. So those would be units for households earning up to 50% of the area median income, all the way up to possibly 70% of the area median income. So this would be an economically diverse, affordable housing community. We develop high-quality units. If you haven't had the opportunity to tour one of our properties, I would highly encourage you to do so, and we would be happy to accommodate that. I always tell folks that ask about what kind of property we're going to build that we are committing to operate these properties for a minimum of 50 years at reduced rents, affordable rents. So we always build from the very beginning, from the design phase, with an eye towards quality and durability and, frankly, marketability. We also have private equity dollars in these, and those investors want to make sure that the property is marketable as a standalone should the affordable purpose not remain long-term. We think that there's a lot of synergies with the development of the Ives One. We can use a lot of the community spaces and community of amenities we've developed in the Ives for life skills training, telehealth, community building events. We think this is a really great place to create this kind of housing. It's transit-oriented, being right on the Wadsworth RTD line. It's walkable. As you know, you can walk to get your groceries and get your mail and access services. Also, we feel that we'll have a lot of efficiencies in operating this property, essentially right across the parking lot from our other property, the Ives One, so we can share some management space and create some economies within the management expenditures. So this is what we actually have right now on the site. So you can see sort of towards the middle the graphic representation of the Ives Phase 1 building, sort of right in the center of the screen, and the parking for that building to the left of the screen. You'll see on the northeast corner there's an O'Reilly's building. Foothills actually owns that site, and we have it's leased to O'Reilly's for retail purposes. We own the building directly east of that, which is actually leased to the city of Wheat Ridge, and they're operating some of their neighborhood services programs out of there. Directly below the Ives, you'll see the Pep Boys building. We own that site. It's got some temporary uses right now. Some of our maintenance team is using it. We've got some property management inventory. And then we're also using it as construction offices for the general contractor building the Ives One. So we're saving some money there on general conditions. You'll see the bank site to the bottom left that we're speaking about today, Applebacher Park, And then on the right side of the graphic is AAA propane, which is not a part of this site or the development intentions currently. So here is our vision for the site. The pink outlined spaces are potential future phases of development there. We don't know what kind of housing that would be or what population it would serve, but as I stated, our statutory mission is to provide affordable housing, so it would somehow comply with that mission or in investing in that mission. And then you'll see where we would like to site phase 2, right over the top of where the bank building is now. You will not see very much parking there because the plan is that that is primarily underground parked. So you won't have a sort of a sea of asphalt view driving up and down Wadsworth, which we think meets your desires for the streetscape there. We also intend sort of the light blue at the top of the phase 2 building is an amenity space. And the Wadsworth side of that and sort of the north side of that, we've already worked with our design team to make sure that we're going to present sort of a retail-esque streetscape, even though there will not be retail in this building. But we've heard you loud and clear that you would like some sort of a visual presence of that, of a mixed-use sort of streetscape. I mentioned a little bit about, I mentioned a little bit about who we will serve and the area median income, economic diversity. Foothills is providing 25 project-based rental assistance vouchers from its own portfolio to the development. We have had some conversations with a few partners, nonprofit service providers, partners, including the City of Wheat Ridge, and offered some preferences for their homeless services navigators to be able to refer families who have experienced or are currently experiencing homelessness. And as I said, we would have some 3-bedroom units in this site that we don't have in phase 1. So now, we've actually been able to submit on August 1st an application for both federal and state low-income housing tax credits to CHAFA. We hope to have an award from them before the end of October. We think our chances are good in this round. CHAFA published on Friday information about the 35 applicants total in this round, and only 4, including us, are bringing their own private activity bond cap to the deal, which makes us very competitive because we only really have to compete for the state tax credits, not necessarily the bond cap pool as well. And thank you, council, because you have contributed your bond cap to us for several years running, and we want to capitalize on that with these kinds of development. Also, the Jefferson County, the City of Golden, Division of Housing have all committed support to this development. So that's another reason we think that now is the time to move forward, either via bond cap, gap financing. They're all in, either on the ICE phase 1 or phase 2. So that is our request of council. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, or have a seat. Done with me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we go to questions from council, I would like to invite the public to speak on this agenda item number 2. I don't have anyone signed up in City Council chambers to speak on this. I know we have at least one speaker online that would like to speak on this. And if there's anyone here who is not signed to speak on this but would like to at this time, I will invite you to the podium. So before you come up, I have a previous caller that's joining us online. Dawn, I can't recall your last name, but I know you wanted to speak on this item. Are you with us now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, if you would please stay unmuted and give us your first name and your last name. Please provide an address. And when you're done that, our clerk is going to start the timing buttons, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the council. So please
Thank you.
continue.
I'm Dawn Underwood, DAWN, and I live at 4601 Teller Street in Wheat Ridge. And I just have some issues from the neighbors in regards to the transparency to what is happening at 44th and Wads. Most neighbors aren't even aware that there's a project of any kind going on. And then the fact that the businesses have been informed about the Bank of the West possible sell, and yet neighbors have not received any information regarding this period. So there are a lot of concerns as to why all of this is happening without individual voting or being informed.
Can you speak to that too? Amy, do you want to answer that question now, or?
If you'd like to address that now, yes. you
Sure.
may.
And Amy, you could probably speak to it a little bit too, but do you want to speak to our notification process on this?
Sure. The subject property is also the subject of a zone change application that's pending and will go to Planning Commission and to City Council in the next few weeks. And so the first requirement of a zone change is a neighborhood meeting, for which we send a letter notice to every owner and occupant, residential and commercial, within 600 feet. And so we did send out several hundred notices for the neighborhood meeting, which occurred a couple weeks ago. I'm forgetting the exact date. Signs and letters will also go out for the public hearings associated with that zone change. That's separate from tonight's action, which is conveyance, not zone change, but we have followed those notification requirements.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that comment. I now had a gentleman raise his hand to speak, and please come to the podium and give us your first name and last, and spell your last name and an address, and the clerk will start the timing buttons at that time.
Jason Sloan, Sloan like the lake, S-L-O-A-N. If you don't know, then you're not a native. I'm at 4696 Hoyt Street. So that 600-foot rule should be expanded, because that's nothing. That parking lot is more than 600 feet. So
Yeah.
there's not many neighbors that are going to get any info. For that, you guys should look into that. There's a lot of common
Agreed.
sense issues in Wheat Ridge that need to be dealt with. But as far as the housing situation goes, why would you not want retail at the bottom? You guys should look at Lincoln Street Apartments. They knocked down the projects and they redid that. They have regular housing in there mixed with low-income housing, and then they have shops because people need places. A lot of the low-income people need places to shop, and that's part of the issue. And there's not great shopping in Wheat Ridge. Last week, they were talking about the electrical stuff. If I got off the highway, there's not much to go to in Wheat Ridge. So to make contractors do that, they should be getting the money, the credits, not just the city. So that's for those few things.
Thank you. Is there anyone here that hasn't signed up who would like to speak on this item? Either online or in the hall. Okay, I don't see anyone coming forward to additionally to speak on this item, so I will open this up to questions from council. Or staff or our presentation. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for coming to present this. A couple things in your presentation I have questions about. Can you speak a little bit more to what the on-site presence will look like? You mentioned a couple things, but can you maybe just kind of give a better description of that in terms of what kind of staff will be there, when will they be there, what kind of things will they be doing, what kind of services for the residents, and how does that sort of interface with the neighborhood?
Right, so, yes, thank you. We will have a full-time on-site property manager. I believe we have an employee unit included in either the IVES Phase 1 or Phase 2, which is often sort of maintenance, sort of oriented employee. We also have a lot of, because we've provided shared spaces, we have interview rooms, we have telehealth rooms. So we do anticipate a lot of our service provider partners, perhaps Family Health West, Jefferson Center, CASA, we would make those, the Veterans Administration. We make those spaces available so that case managers can actually come on site to work with the residents. So there's generally a lot of that kind of traffic as well. As far as after hours presence, all of our properties within our 22-unit portfolio have contracted security. Cameras are viewed from a central location. Drive-bys happen periodically throughout the night and weekends. So that's sort of the general presence we provide.
Thank you. And then something else you mentioned in your presentation early on was activating the park. Is that just something by being in proximity to the park? Like, how do you, like, you named it in your presentation. What does that look like from the developer standpoint?
Yeah, so I think, I didn't, I guess, mean that formally. Obviously, the park is not ours to manage or program. But I think with an increased residential population in such close proximity to the park, we anticipate it to get more use, lots of eyes on it. So I think that's what we mean by activating the park.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. Could you just, I know you talked about it briefly about the mixed-use retail. Could you talk about that again?
We will not have retail in our current vision for the Ives Phase 2. To kind of address a comment a little bit earlier from the caller in terms of public notification and stuff, I want to be very clear, we're not the owners of the bank site, so we haven't submitted site plan, we haven't submitted building permit requests, none of that, public process and approval process has even been initiated. What I've shown you and presented tonight is really about our vision, and it's a vision that we have worked with a master planning and engineering firm, an architectural design firm, and general contractors to sort of vet. So we believe it's feasible, functional, and most desirable from where we are now, but it's subject to change because it still has to go through your process with planning.
Thank you. Councilor Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Mikulak, could you just explain our notification, like how we come up with the parameters of where the 600 feet start and stop with a property, please?
Yes, thank you. So we draw that boundary based on the parcel boundary. So in this case, the subject property actually doesn't have a parking lot, so it's just a small corner of the overall block that is otherwise controlled by Foothills Regional. So it's the rectangle that is the bank and then 600 feet from that rectangle in all directions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councilor Nosler-Beck online with your hand up.
Thanks. I wanted to just, I guess, further just get some clarification on why not retail along the bottom corridor. Just to answer that question, is that something that has to do with with Foothills? Could you just explain why the decision was made? And it may have been something that was discussed in a meeting before that I may have missed. I'm sorry about that.
So no final decision has been made because there are no approved project plans. However, we have decided not to pursue an application to include retail in Phase 2. Mixing retail with low-income housing tax credit financing programs is incredibly complex. And we just, for us, it's not our mission. Again, you know, we don't want to be in the retail landlord business. Our mission is strictly around providing affordable housing.
Thanks so much. And that was the explanation I was kind of looking for, just to explain why that isn't necessarily what that would be used for, even though it would look and feel like that. Is there an opportunity with all of those service providers that are going, like, to have them almost have like a storefront or something like that? Just if we're in the creative space here, I mean, it would be great if there was a place that was accessible not only to the people that live there, but was a public space for people to access those resources, and it felt as approachable as a retail location or something. I just think that could be really interesting way to think about it. So in the early stages that we're in, just something to think about.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple things I just want to confirm. So currently, it was in your presentation, but I just want to confirm, you are in ownership of all the property around the bank already?
Correct.
Correct. And so if we were to not move forward with the sale, this would be an isolated parcel of 15,000 square feet that you would have ownership of everything around it except for this parcel. Is that correct?
Correct. And the surrounding is already has the zoning that would allow us to build multifamily around versus sort of right up with the Wadsworth frontage.
So then, just to confirm, the construction you're doing right now in the phase one is a use by right, so it wasn't something you had to come to the city and ask for permission. As a landowner, you're building within the rights you have as a landowner for it.
That's correct.
Okay. And then, staff, I just want to verify that when this comes back to rezoning, I want to be really mindful of, it's a quasi judicial case, so we really shouldn't be discussing it tonight. But just a confirmation for the notice for that hearing would be for the larger property that was outlined as far as the edges and where that 600 feet would start. Is that correct?
Just for the portion that's being rezoned, so just the bank parcel. The
Just the
balance
bank
of the
parcel.
block has been rezoned to mixed use already.
Okay. And then the reason the city's considering this is as a result of our adoption of the affordable housing plan and the strategy and action plan. So it's consistent with previous policies that we've adopted.
Correct. I think one of the priorities of the affordable housing strategy plan is to contribute to the experts who do provide affordable housing, because we don't do that as a city necessarily, and land banking is one of those strategies, and we haven't had many opportunities to land bank property for such activities, and this was, I think, a great opportunity. The reason we don't believe this hard corner is great for a standalone parcel for retail is the reason the city had to purchase this whole parcel for the Wadsworth project is because we needed enough right of way that made the rest of the parcel basically unusable. So we had to buy the whole site. So there's the site as is would not have enough probably room for parking or for any other activities that are needed for a standalone retail site. So we felt this was a great opportunity to provide it for an adjacent project, and it does help meet your goals of increasing affordable housing.
Yeah, and one last question. So if we were to be retaining this property, whether it's us or future users, what would access to that property look like with Foothills owning all of the surrounding property? If it remains a standalone parcel, what would access look like?
I can take
One of
that
you
one.
speak to that?
Yeah, so it'd be required to have a cross-access easement if this were to be an independently owned parcel separate from Foothills owning it.
So by that, you mean that there would be no street access? It would have to actually access through the Foothills?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, those are my questions for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think Councilor Hulteen just kind of touched on a couple of my questions, but I think my biggest one, because we've just finished this affordable housing study, so I mean, everybody up here has logged some hours talking about it and researching it. But when you look at a site like the Ives, what makes you choose a site? I know you kind of look at like transportation, surrounding retail, things like that. So what made you choose that site just in general?
Yeah, we look at walkability, we look at access to transit, look at access to services. You know, frankly, sometimes it's a matter of convenience. We've already owned a couple of those parcels, so making an assemblage there together was feasible. We look at zoning, we look at, you know, cost to build, and, you know, all together, the Ives and the Ives campus came together as a good site for a project like this, by our estimation.
And you guys have another site just up the street on Vance 2, correct? That just
41st and Vance, we just purchased, yes,
Yeah.
with your help, yes.
And the idea is to kind of connect both sites and run services at the Ives, is that?
Yeah, so once the Ives is complete, the manager overseeing the 24 units at Vance Street will likely be based at the Ives.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Michalak, could you tell us about the meeting that was had for this property? You said there was a meeting, or it hadn't happened yet? I'm sorry.
There was a neighborhood meeting in association with the zone change that has happened and will be recapped at the zone change hearing. There were not a lot of people in attendance.
But there was, yeah, how many letters went out? I'm just curious.
I don't know the exact number, but several hundred.
Several hundred. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. I have just a couple of questions. Oh, go ahead, Councilor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just hoping that staff could expand upon some of Councilmember Hulteen's comments or questions in regards to if we were to maintain this property, there are significant constraints not only with access, but size and feasibility of retail spaces from our end. So can you maybe just speak to that as well?
I can start, yeah. So it's a good question. I mean, the challenge with this property relates a lot to the Wadsworth project. When we, as was explained, when we bought the right-of-way there, we took away the drive-through lane for the bank and their parking that was more adjacent to Wadsworth and 44th. The taking of that parking, the purchase of that parking through the Wadsworth project is what necessitated through the federal process for us to deem it a full acquisition. So once you impact a property to a certain extent. So we knew in choosing to prioritize the Wadsworth improvements that we were going to have an impact on that hard corner that would necessitate the city to purchase it in full. And we frankly didn't know when we did that sort of what would happen. We knew it would be a difficult, viable commercial site through construction, which is why we're using it to phase and stage rather and office our construction staff. We haven't done a whole lot to sort of figure out what other commercial uses could it be in terms of actively marketing it, but we have had periodic inquiries. I think the challenge there is shared parking and shared access is not usually attractive to commercial development. We have those situations in other areas of the city, and they tend to be the parcels that get tenanted last. It's very visible on the hard corner, but it's also sort of just north of our commercial core. And then I think as the affordable housing plan advanced, we realized, you know, the cost of housing is tied to the cost of development, is tied to the cost of land, and we don't have a lot of opportunities to donate money or land. And when Foothills engaged us to talk about their potential future phases, once they had purchased the Pep Boys parcel, it seemed like a more natural integration into that overall block than to continue to sort of force a commercial tenant who would be squeezed in with limited parking and limited access.
Thank you. And just one more question for Amy. I think we had talked about it during our study session in regards to the propane company on that what is it, the southeast corner. Have you had any conversations with them? Are there any intentions to try to purchase that property or can you also, staff, speak to kind of the radius in which they would have to maintain like a safe zone as well?
Staff of the Housing Authority has not really directly had conversations with the owners of the propane building. A broker has reached out to them and let them know that if they had an interest in selling, we might be interested in being a buyer, but we have no intention to try to force them out or rush their decision or, yeah. But I would say we have had some open dialogue through intermediaries.
And in terms of what we know, the city hasn't tried to acquire or make any changes to that propane business, but what we've learned from other developers in the area is that the presence of the combustible propane tanks results in the application of a HUD financing rule whereby they establish essentially a blast zone and say that they won't finance residential units within a certain distance of propane tanks. So actually a few years ago, those tanks were modified to be smaller tanks, which has a smaller radius, and that allowed the Town Center North apartments to be sited where they are today. The smaller tanks still have a radius associated with them. I want to say it's maybe like 100 feet. It would affect the site plan in that block north of 44th, and it also actually impacts the development of the property where the Panda King used to be. They'll have to have a little bit of a setback because of it. So it's not a city requirement, it's a HUD financing requirement, but it does have an impact on the type of land use that can be within that area.
Thank you. I had just a couple of questions. Want to make sure I heard correctly. You said the length of time that they would be permanently affordable was 15 or 50?
50.
50. Thank you very much. And I thought I heard you say you were going to have structured parking on the lower level?
Yep, that is the current intent.
Okay. And how will you handle guest parking? Will that park in the lower level, or will there be any sites for guests of the residents?
There will be shared parking agreements with other phases that are maybe parked at a higher density. For example, I believe the IBS Phase 1 is parked at a higher density.
Okay. Okay. Councilor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That spurred another question in regards to what is going to be happening after that 50 years.
The reality, well, I'm not going to be in this seat at the Housing Authority in 50 years, but I'll tell you we've been providing housing since 1975 in Jefferson County under the same statutory mandate, and I don't see that changing. It would be unusual for us to want to divest of a property like that.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I love thinking 50 years from now. It's actually kind of exciting. One thing, actually, as this conversation is evolving here, you mentioned pretty early in your presentation that you've got private investment in the property, and then you were saying how some of that private investment really drives, building a quality product and making sure that it's something that both, meets the standards that we'd want for all of our neighbors for living. And can you speak a little bit about how that translates? Like, what are the interiors like? Like, what is that quality of living standard that you aspire for in your developments?
I would say that our standard selections typically include MDF baseboard, solid surface countertops, ceiling fans, extra sound insulation, additional backing in, bathroom walls for grab bars, for accommodations for folks. So things like that. We try to pick, as I said, we're gonna be operating this property for probably 50 years at least on restricted rents. So the other thing that's really important to us besides durability is operating efficiency. So we try to build to a very high energy efficiency standard. As a matter of fact, we're required to build to a very high energy efficiency standard to receive state and federal tax credits. We, as an example, at Aubie at Allison Village in Old Town Arvada, our most recently opened new construction, we went over and above with Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready Home certification enough to access the 45L investment tax credits. So,
Thank you. Before I close the public hearing and ask for a motion, are there any more questions from council? Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and Councilor Hulteen, may I have a motion on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve Council Bill number 18, 2023, an ordinance approving the sale of certain property owned by the city located at 7575 West 44th Avenue on second reading, and that it takes effect immediately upon adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Councilor Ohm. Is there discussion on the motion? Councilor Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to say that I am in support of offloading this land. I don't think that there's a feasible use for it by the city. I think it would prove to be very challenging to find any tenants for that property, especially as a public entity. And we have adopted and been in support of an affordable housing strategy in our community, and I think we've done a very good job at studying this, discussing this, and I think this corridor, 44th and Wadsworth, is the appropriate use for that. It's along a major transit corridor. It has walkability and everything that we would want within close distance to the affordable housing. And so I am very much in support of this and appreciate the partnership with Foothills Regional Housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Ohm?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be voting in support of this, but the one thing I keep thinking about is the potential of retail, and I totally understand, but my thought is just looking at opportunities. If there's somebody that didn't own a car and they couldn't go very far, would there be an opportunity for them to do something kind of small to lift their spirit, and perhaps have an opportunity for the public to come over and have that little bit of interaction? That was kind of my thought. It wasn't that, hey, we're gonna have the next big box or something like that, but just trying to create some little opportunities so that you'd have those interactions. And so if it did happen, I would be excited, but I completely understand the reasoning that you gave. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too will be voting in support of this. Echoing Councilmember Dozeman, it's an isolated parcel that's surrounded by use by right by a developer, and the feasible use of the property for anything other than adding it to the property that surrounds it seems like it would be an underutilization of the corner. I've heard from constituents who are concerned about it. One thing that strikes me, wherever we're putting high density housing, whether it's income qualified or any type of high density housing, I'm very supportive. I've made very clear my policy is I will support high density on our corridors. And I think we're really fortunate here that this is a project that actually doesn't all major corridors back to neighborhoods at some point. And this particular project actually doesn't immediately back to any residential properties. It is really, I think, perfectly suited for the corner. And I know that the city and Foothills Housing are good partners in trying to, make sure that that whole area, remains a great place for everyone who wants to use it for, the reasons we all have rights to use public spaces. And I'm really excited to hear in particular that there's talk about 2 and 3 bedroom units. My understanding of our situation in Jefferson County is that we have a lot of families that are really struggling to find housing. And the fact that we're able to provide housing solutions that are walking distance to an elementary school for families that are struggling with housing. I know a lot of us on the dais are aware that we've got families at all of our schools who are unhoused. So I think this is a good location, but I encourage District 2 residents. We do have a zoning hearing coming up, I believe, on September 25th. that is another opportunity for your voice to be heard. But, you know, the work we've done up here on the dais in terms of really trying to figure out housing solutions for people in our community that are struggling with it, I think that this is a really good step forward, and I think it's as good a location as any, if not maybe even better than we could have hoped for. So I'm grateful that the city's in a position to be able to contribute land and make it happen.
Thank you. Councilor Nosler-Beck.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to be voting in support of this this evening, and I just wanted to say a couple things. Originally, well, not originally, but long ago, the original owners of this property were my my family, the Apelbachers, and they came to Wheat Ridge and, you know, settled on that property to farm, and they found a lot of really great opportunity there. And I think this is just a really incredible opportunity once again for Wheat Ridge to provide some real opportunities for people that need them. And I'm just really excited to see that this is how this whole corner and corridor is going to be transformed. And I really appreciate just the insights and looking at how we connect to some of the parks and open spaces that we have, including Apelbacher Park. And I would like to just, you know, offer up as things progress that we have lots of memorabilia and photos and things that could really, I think, create a cool sense of place in the area and do some wayfinding and things. So please, as the project progresses, reach out to me, and I'd love to be a part of it. So thanks for all the work on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council?
Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. We will now go to agenda item number 3. Councilor Dozeman, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council Bill number 19, 2023, an ordinance approving the rezoning of property located at 4735 Kipling Street from Commercial 1 C1 to mixed-use commercial interstate, MUC interstate, case number WZ 2305. This is an ordinance on first reading. At issue, the applicant is requesting approval of a zone change from Commercial 1 to mixed-use commercial interstate for property located at 4735 Kipling Street. The zone change will result in a zoning that enables revitalization and reuse of the site by expanding permitted uses.
Thank you very much. This is an ordinance on first reading to set the date, time, and location for a public hearing. This matter is quasi-judicial, so it is under those rules. May I have a motion on this item, please, Councilor Dozeman?
I move to approve Council Bill number 19, 2023, an ordinance approving the rezoning of property located at 4735 Kipling Street from Commercial 1 to C1 to mixed-use commercial interstate, MUC interstate, on first reading, order it published, public hearing set for Monday, September 11, 2023, at 6:30 p.m. as a virtual meeting and in City Council chambers, and that it take effect 15 days after final publication.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Councilor Hutchinson. Will the clerk please poll the council?
My apologies to the council, it's still not working well. Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. This will bring us to agenda item number 4. Councilor Hoppe, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council Bill number 20-2023, an ordinance amending sections 11-561, 11-566, and 26-114 for the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the hotel licensing program. Ordinance on first reading. At issue on October 25th, 2021, City Council passed Ordinance 1723, adding new Article 14 to Chapter 11 and updating use schedules in Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws to establish a hotel licensing program. Section 11-569 of the code requires council to review the implementation of the ordinance on or before June 30th, 2023, and every 18 months thereafter. Council conducted a review of the ordinance on June 12th, 2023, and provided consensus for some updates to the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws.
Thank you very much. This is an ordinance on first reading to set the date, time, and location for a public hearing. This item is not quasi-judicial. Councilor Hoppe, may I have a motion on this item?
I move to approve Council Bill number 20-2023, an ordinance amending sections 11-561, 11-566, and 26-114 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the hotel licensing program on first reading. Order it published, public hearing set for Monday, August 28th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. as a virtual meeting and in City Council chambers, and that it take effect 15 days after final publication.
Second.
We have a second by Councilwoman Dozeman. Will the clerk please poll the council?
Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. We will now go to agenda item number 5. Councilor Weaver, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is Council Bill number 21-2023, an ordinance giving notice of and calling for submitting a ballot question at the city's regular November 7, 2023 election concerning the issuance of debt and an extension of the expiring sales and use tax of 1/2 cent or 0.50%, to pay such debt and other matters related thereto. At issue on July 17, 2023, or 2023, excuse me, City Council directed staff to move forward with a ballot question for the November 2023 election to extend the city's 1/2 cent sales and use tax for 20 years and to issue debt to finance up to $75 million in public infrastructure improvements. These improvements would include sidewalks, bike lane, and street improvements along primary street corridors, sidewalk gap construction, and other sidewalk maintenance along major pedestrian corridors, and routes to schools and drainage and floodplain infrastructure improvements at priority locations in the city. To include this question on the 2023 ballot, the City Council must set the final ballot language and submit it to the Jefferson County Clerk and Recorder by September 8th. Setting the ballot language by ordinance requires a first reading on August 14th and a second reading and public hearing on August 28th to meet this deadline. The attached ordinance accomplishes this.
Thank you. This is an ordinance on first reading to set the date, time, and location for a public hearing. It is not quasi-judicial. Councilor Weaver, may I have a motion on this item?
You may. I move to approve Council Bill number 21-2023, an ordinance giving notice of and calling for submitting a ballot question at the city's regular November 7, 2023 election concerning the issuance of debt and an extension of the expiring sales and use tax of 1/2 cent to pay such debt and other matters related thereto on first reading. Order it published, public hearing set for Monday, August 28th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. as a virtual meeting and in City Council chambers, and that it take effect immediately upon adoption.
Second.
We have we have a motion and a second by Councilor Hulteen. Will the clerk please poll the council?
Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. This will bring us to agenda item number 6. Mayor Pro Tem Stites, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 6, motion approving a participating addendum to the NASPO Value Point Fleet Card Services contract with the State of Colorado for implementation of the WEX fuel card system. At issue, the city currently utilizes 2 underground tanks at the Public Works shop to provide diesel and unleaded fuel for city vehicles. The tanks are 34 years old and are nearing the end of their useful life. That's kind of sad. Sorry. Therefore, staff evaluated fueling options and is recommending implementation of a 4 to 6, okay. Month pilot program for the police department to consider the WEX fuel card system. The WEX fuel card system allows the fueling of city vehicles at all participating gas stations nationwide, which will improve efficiency for staff as well as provide improved reporting and monitoring. Slightly higher costs are anticipated as the city will pay the advertised cost at the pump less any taxes, which will likely be more than the bulk rate currently provided through the city's vendor. The pilot program will allow for an evaluation of the pros and cons as well as the actual cost increases, if any. Therefore, staff recommends that the city enter into the agreement with WEX Bank by approving an addendum to the State of Colorado contract number 163711 under National Association of State Procurement Officials, NASPO, Master Agreement number 00819.
Thank you. This will be a motion of the council. It is not quasi-judicial. Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation on this item?
The issue statement was pretty comprehensive, but Maria is here this evening for any questions that you may have.
Okay. Director DeAndrea, do you have no presentation? So before we go to questions of council, I will open this up to the public to speak. I don't think I have anybody signed up to speak on this item, but if you are here in council chambers and would like to speak on this item, you may do so now by coming to the podium. And if you are joining us online, if you would please raise your hand in the virtual format, we're happy to bring you into the meeting. Do I have any members of the public? Yes, sir, please come. If you would please once again give us your name and spell your last name and give us your address. We'll have 3 minutes.
Jason Sloan, S-L-O-A-N, and at 4696 Hoyt Street. I was just wondering, has any other banks been checked out to see, because there's a lot of fuel cards out there that give you money back, percentages back. So 9/10 of a cent off of taxes doesn't really do anything compared to those others. There's a lot of them that give percentages back, and you can track everything also. So I think it should be looked into what you guys are getting compared to what you could get. My 2 cents.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Goff or Director DeAndrea, would you like to respond to the question?
Yes, we have looked at other options. I think the benefits of this particular system is that it's currently being used by the state across various departments, including Colorado Department of Transportation. While there are some cards that offer a rebate or a slight increase, there is an upfront cost as well as an ongoing cost to maintain that. So we think that those offset each other, and by entering into this agreement, we think this is the best opportunity for the city.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak on this item? You may do so by coming forward to the podium now if you're in the hall, or joining us by raising your hand online. Give that just a moment. I don't see anybody coming forward or see anyone raising their hand, so I'll close our public speaking on this item and open it up to questions from council. Councilor Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm assuming we would discuss this at the end of the 4 to 6 month pilot project period. But in the event that we would move forward with the WEX cards, would you at that point in time or look at other options and kind of price compare? And then what would it look like if we were to decommission those tanks?
Certainly. So I think the intent of the pilot program is to see if actually the benefits pan out. So, you know, what's being promised through the fuel card, is there efficiency? Is there the number of gas stations that they're saying are available? And do we anticipate or do we encounter any actual problems? And then is the reporting system easy to read? Is it helpful to us as staff versus what we currently do? And are we saving time and effort through that? So we're evaluating all those aspects. At this point, again, we've already looked at those other options, so I think our recommendation back to council after the pilot program is, yes, this is panning out as to what we thought it would do. This is what we perceive as being the potential increased costs or not, as well as those pros and cons. Otherwise, we feel like we've already evaluated those other options. So really, I think it would be a no-go or go at that point. And the cost to do so, there is no cost for us to set it up, so there's no cost for us to back out of the program if we decided that it's not the right fit for us after that pilot.
And then at that point in time, if we were to no longer be using the fuel tanks, would we decommission them and remove them, or what would that look like?
I think it's a little bit of a longer term. It's not that it's an immediate need where it needs to be done tomorrow. We do inspect them annually, so that's through the Colorado Department of Oil and Pipeline Safety, who actually comes out and inspects those on an annual basis. So I think we're fine right now. I think it's just looking into the near future here. Is there a potential option, knowing, and through our facilities master plan, is this something that we should consider long-term, to consider replacing those and putting them back in that location, or looking at a different avenue?
Thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. Was there any comparison with, compared to like Lakewood or Nevada Golden? Like, what do they use?
No, but other cities that I've worked for have this program in place. So specifically, City of Commerce City uses this identical system. There are other, as I mentioned, CDOT does as well. There's other communities. I have not asked specifically of Lakewood and Golden how they do their fueling.
Thank you.
But I could do that research and bring that back when we bring back the pilot project recommendation.
Thank you. Director, I had a couple of questions myself. We're using this with the police vehicles on the test pilot program, but the city has many different kinds of vehicles that we fuel. Do you think that that this card would be maybe a solution to part of our fueling needs, and do you foresee that we may continue to want, particularly for our larger vehicles, another in-house sort of fueling option?
Yes, right now we're just considering unleaded only service, not our diesel. So our heavy equipment, our large, our backhoe or loader, those sort of things take diesel. And we think it's more efficient to continue to operate those or fuel those out of the shop since they're located there anyways. So really, we're just targeting the unleaded at this point, again, seeing how that goes. And we picked the police department because as close as the shops is from City Hall, there's still a distance back and forth. This way, this allows them, we feel there's 11 or 14 gas stations within Wheat Ridge that are eligible under this program. Therefore, they, at any of those locations, they could fuel up and be back on the road, especially our patrol vehicles, without having to make that drive back and forth to the shops.
So they would be out in the public, and we certainly think they can find it and buy it in Wheat Ridge?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councilor Hulteen.
Not really a question, but Director Deandra's comments just kind of pointed out something that, looking at reduction of the need for gas usage is something increasingly the city should be considering. I know we've talked about electrification of our fleet, and I hope moving forward we can figure out more ways to do that. But one of the things I like about this is it does reduce the vehicle miles traveled by our city's fleet, as well as the tankers that would be refueling our tanks. So it's actually it is slightly reducing the amount of gas we're using as a city, as well as the amount of gas and wear and tear in our streets that the tankers that would be delivering to fill our proprietary tanks. So it's a slight move in that direction, and I hope in a couple of years we're talking about how we need to be charging more of our cars and not filling them up. But I appreciate this. I'm in support.
Are there any further questions before I ask for motion on this item? Seeing none, Councilor Stites, may I have a motion on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve a participating amendment to the NASPO Value Point Fleet Card Services contract with the state of Colorado for implementation of the WEX fuel card system.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Councilor Weaver. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council?
Mr. Mayor, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. That concludes our agenda items. Now let us go back to the agenda, and I think we go next to city staff report. Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick update on budgets. We always like to give a mid-year budget update to City Council. We just received our financials for July, which encompasses or includes all the retail sales through June of this last year. Unfortunately, we're starting to see a flattening of our sales tax revenues. We've had a couple of good years. Even during COVID, we were seeing 5, 6, 7, 8% increases. It's not just Wheat Ridge. I've been talking to my friends in the other cities, and everybody's starting to see a flattening. I think the good news is the predictions of a recession are going away, but there's a very soft landing, which is a good thing. But through July, our sales tax is actually down about 0.5% over the same time last year. So nothing horrible, but we're hoping maybe the second half of the year we start seeing an uptick. However, total general fund revenue is up 3% compared to last year. There are certain areas where we're seeing really positive trends. Our facilities fees at our rec center are up 16%, so we're starting to see a big increase again after COVID. Swimming pool fees are up 13%. Traffic fines, not everybody's probably happy about that, but are up 94%. And thank our city treasurer, our investment income is up 271%. So we've seen significant increases. As you all know, interest rates are up, but our general fund spending is right on track compared to normal, so that's good. Otherwise, we have a healthy and reliable fund balances and readily available cash. Our cash reserves and invested funds are doing very well. We did end fiscal year 2022 with a 34.5% reserve, so healthy reserve at the end of last year. But we're currently working on the 2024 budget, so trying to balance the budget with those reductions in revenues. Our hope is to get a draft budget to you all by September 8th. For a study session, work session on that for September 18th. So you should see that soon. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. City Attorney's Matters, Mr. Dahl.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. We will go to elected officials matters. I'll start with the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In case there's anyone who hasn't learned the news yet, there is an election on November 7th. The period for circulating a nominating petition to run for city clerk, city treasurer, or one of the 4 council seats that are up for re-election or election ends on the 28th of August. The nominating petitions must be turned into the clerk's office by 5 p.m. on August 28th. Any petition that is short of enough signatures, which is 25, will then still have a 3-day period to cure the deficiency. However, you must file the initial petition no later than 5 p.m. on August 28th. Anyone who has questions about the election or how to participate or run for office is invited to call the city clerk's office, and we'll be delighted to give them the details we have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We will go to Councilor Nosler-Beck. Do you have anything for us tonight?
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to thank the staff for putting together the safe routes for the schools, for both students going from Color Strand to Prospect Valley now and Wilmer Davis over to Stevens. It sounds like the school district, Patrick, you'd gotten that up to the school district, and I know at least at Stevens at their back to school night barbecue tonight, those safe routes were being handed out to people who attended, and will also be in the first newsletter that goes out to everybody at the end of this week. So just thank you for all the work that went into that. I know that there's a lot of parents going, how are we going to get to school? In addition to everything else that's going on with construction and things. So thank you. And then also, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to everybody who made the Carnation Festival so incredible. The parade was so much fun. I was so excited to be able to see everybody and be there for a little bit. A special shout out to Councilmember Dozeman for all of your incredible work on the parade again this year, and all of your work with the Carnation Festival. It was just an awesome celebration of our incredible community, and also the fireworks were just unbelievable. They were really good the first night. Like I thought they were the best they'd ever been. But then the second night, like we were watching them from my backyard, and my dad said, "I think this is what it feels like when you go to heaven." He was like, it just totally engulfed in those beautiful fireworks. And I've mentioned before that my parents just recently moved to Wheat Ridge, so they felt like it was a big, huge welcome for them, and we had lots of family around us. So thank you so much for all the hard work, from the city to Local Works to all of the board members for the Carnation Festival, and everybody who volunteered and helped is so special. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to echo just gratitude for everyone involved in making Carnation Festival and the parade a success, especially Councilmember Dozman. I know you work really hard on that every year. The parade's just such a joy to be a part of, and sometimes I like to joke that it's amazing that there's anyone left to watch the parade because there's so many of our community members in the parade. But it was just really fun to see all the faces, and I love that our senior centers along the corridor, have their residents out, and saw lots of kids on bikes, and just a really, really fun event. I've got two things. One is we, on our consent agenda, we provided funding for the resurfacing, and the Pierce Street resurfacing. I just want to call attention and make sure that we're balancing out our bike lanes on that, because like some work that was recently done between 26th and 29th resulted in the bike lane stripe moving to the west a little bit, so that bike lane's now too small, and we've got sort of uneven margins because we put the bike lanes in with the existing striping. So I'm sort of curious, since you're here, Director Dandra, like, is that something that we're looking at to kind of balance out those bike lane widths on both sides to make sure they're a little bit more even?
Yes. So I think the changes that we've made this year are to actually create detailed striping plans, and staff will be marking them out in advance, so not just kind of leaving it up to the contractor, but actually marking them so that they know exactly where to put those stripes. So it is very critical. As you know, those 6 inches one way or the other can make a big difference. So my direction is measure twice, cut once, or stripe once.
Yeah.
So we're going to make sure that that's marked accurately before any of the striping goes down.
Okay, great. I'm excited to hear that you guys are doing the striping plans and giving attention to that. So, and then Happiness Gardens report. It's happy over at Happiness Gardens. It's harvest season is in full thrust, and what's fun is that it's not just a bunch of bees and amazing sunflowers. There's actually a lot of gardeners there when I walk by, because there's a lot of things to collect and pick, and so I've enjoyed admiring what's growing, but also getting to meet more neighbors who are busy little gardeners right now. So if you haven't stopped by Happiness Gardens recently, I suggest you do so, because it is at its best this month.
Thank you. Councilor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to thank all the people who organized the Carnation Festival, the people who worked there, the public that attended the parade and the festival itself, because this weekend was a happy weekend in Wheat Ridge. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This might be a little long-winded, but I also just want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to everyone that participated in the Carnation Festival this past weekend. It was our 54th annual event to celebrate the incorporation of the city of Wheat Ridge, and it wouldn't be possible without all of the partners and support. And it really starts with council support in funding the festival, and staff support in helping, with the permitting process, the park amenities, Parks and Rec Department, Public Works. And it really is all hands on deck all weekend. Wheat Ridge Police Department's there 24 hours all weekend, and have had to implement extra safety measures for the parade, and we've just really appreciated working alongside the city. And I want to also give a huge shout out to our Wheat Ridge Carnation Festival Board. It is a separate 501c3 nonprofit that plans and organizes this event. It is primarily run by all volunteers, I also want to give a shout out to the Optimist Club, the Rotary Club, and the Kiwanis Club for having their members come and serve beer all weekend. The volunteering is absolutely amazing, and I've been truly honored to serve as the parade chair for the last 7 years. And I said this at the mayor's reception to the few that are. It is a pretty small group that attends that, but it's always a wonderful event to kick off. You know, it renews my sense of love for this community, and having grown up going to the Carnation Festival every year and then now being a part of the planning and then seeing it come to fruition has been amazing. And this year I sat on the golf cart in the back watching my kids ride all of the carnival rides and catching the fireworks show, particularly on Saturday, which was absolutely amazing. And my older son and I were just sitting there, and he kind of laid his head on my shoulder and he goes, "This is my favorite part of living here. This is the most wonderful time of year," and it just, I love that I get to share those experiences with my children and my family, and I know how special it is, and I just want to thank everybody for being involved. You guys all help, you know, Councilmember Weaver with the pie contest, Councilmember Stites and personal achievement, not only being in the parade but also sponsors, and everyone just shows up, and I love it, and it fills my cup to be crazy enough to do it every year because it is definitely my busiest time of year, even if it is the most fun. So I wanted to thank everybody, and I would like to give a shout out to our chair, Joey DeMott, who's the owner of Pietro's Pizzeria. He really has turned everything around and made, you know, the circus, the Zope Circus, possible, and securing the carnival every year. So it's really been a team effort, and it wouldn't be possible without everybody involved. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor
What's my name? What's my name? Thank you. I also want to echo all of the thanks, but specifically I do want to talk about pie for a moment. You know, we're really I mean, I know the fireworks are great and I love the parade, but if you have not stopped by to see the amazing quality of work that people put into their baked goods in Wheat Ridge, the pie contest is not to be missed. Whether you're a baker or whether you're a pie eater, there's fun for everyone, and the pies were gorgeous. I'm just going to report on the top two first prize winners. One was a peach frangipan pie. That was the Colorado win. It has to have some Colorado ingredients. It was the peaches. And the other, I was surprised, this was a very good pie. I was surprised it was a winner, though, on a hot day, was a Tortuga brownie amazingness. It was, I don't know, maybe Councilor Stites will describe. He was one of the pie judges. But all of the pies were amazing. We had a Colorado cantaloupe pie, just all sorts of interesting things, and it was just the skill level. It's really fun to take pictures of an entire table of pies. Can I just say that? And to be able to cut these pies and, you know, accidentally eat some of them. And so I just want to thank everybody who comes and participates in the chili cook-off and the pie contest and all the things that you can be involved with. And I love what Councilor Hulteen said, that, you know, the Wheat Ridge Parade is, I can't tell if people are here to see it or if we're all just walking in it, which is really sort of fun because the lines are very blurred. So thank you, Leah. Thank you to the entire committee. It was just a really, really great festival. I think fun was had by all, and the weather held and all the good things. So thanks.
Thank you.
Mayor, point of information.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Stites, how much weight did you gain as the pie judge?
I will say the bites were small, but they were filling. Like it's I think there were 16 pies or something. So rounding 10 was.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councilor Weaver. Councilor Alm.
Thank you, Mayor. To start off, before the parade, I was able to go to the mayor's reception, which was a really nice event, and it it felt a little more special this year because we were able to, some of us get together and take some photos and just kind of take a deep breath, before the parade. And it was really nice to have that experience, and especially in Colorado, just, you just kind of take it in, and I don't take that for granted of having that kind of experience. And then the actual parade itself, it is really kind of an honor to march with everybody else, all my fellow council members, the staff, and we had, there's other people, we had staff and council, with their, kids and grandkids, and it makes it just a little more special to be in that parade. And it went off without a hitch. I thought everything was very, very smooth. I did not take that for granted. All the planning that went into it, the police department, staff, all the volunteers, and then just to see it, my opinion was there was a lot more people there this year than there was last year. And I had some out-of-town friends that came, and they were really surprised at how many people were at the parade. And so at least my opinion is it was very successful, and people are starting to kind of find out really about our parade. It went off really well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do also want to just echo my thanks to the board for the Wheat Ridge Carnation Festival. It's always fun to be in the parade, and my problem is I can't figure out how I'm going to decorate the car every year. But this year she was a ladybug, so in case anybody didn't realize. And but also my youngest, who typically has to play a softball game on that Saturday morning, did not have to this year. So the whole softball team got to also be a part of the parade. So, and then my oldest, who's the coach of the Palms team, was also in it. So it was all of us, our whole family was in it in different booths. So it was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate the Carnation Festival every year. And eventually I'll get back to the point where I'm not too busy that weekend to start entering my chili in the chili cook-off again. I just figure I'd give some people a couple of years off so that they could start winning too.
Thank you for your generosity. Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Same, I'd like to echo my thanks to the Carnation Festival Board and, Joe DeMont and everybody that works on that. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work getting ready for it. So just as a business owner, so I know how much work goes into it. I really, really, really enjoy that every year. I know my grandfather was one of the people that started it 54 years ago, and I think I've been in close to 30 of the 40 of potential parades that I've been alive for. So it's always fun, and I think personal achievement this year, I think we had close to 100 people come and participate, so it was a good turnout for us, and really enjoyed it. We love supporting the festival and everything that goes on. It's a great thing for Wheat Ridge. It's what brought us together 54 years ago, and I think it's something that brings us together every year. So I absolutely love that. I want to thank Ms. Lauren Michalak and her staff for putting together the safe routes for all the schools. I think I sent that out on social media today. I got a lot of good comments about it, and I sent it over to the principal at Prospect Valley and stuff, and really, really good feedback from some of the staff there. So really appreciate that, and a lot of the parents. I was out this morning with my kids. We were kind of rehearsing what that walk and what that drive is going to look like, and and we weren't the only ones. There were a lot of people out kind of figuring out what that looks like today and rehearsing that. So we definitely appreciate the effort of the staff on that as well. So as school starts tomorrow for most Jeffco schools, so please be safe as everybody's going out there and dropping kids off. I know there's going to be a lot of kids excited to get into, or maybe not excited to get back to school, but a lot of parents excited to get them back to school. So please slow down in the neighborhoods and when you get close to those schools, because I know especially around Prospect Valley for the next month or so, there's no traffic circle. That stuff is going to be a mess. So please be patient with all the residents. And if you're still looking for back to school shopping, you can find it and you can buy it in Wheat Ridge. So please do. We're down 0.0% on our sale. We need to work on that.
Thank you. I had just a question looking over our consent agenda on our mill and overlay. I had thought we had 29th Avenue from Sheridan to Fenton on the list this year. Is that still current?
It was originally on our plan. I think there was some discussion by the engineering staff of wanting to look at neighborhood traffic calming along there, or traffic calming in general. And so we've delayed the overlay pending that installation. So they
Okay.
want to go through that process, look and see if there is a need for traffic calming out there, and then incorporate those elements before we would come and mill and overlay the street. So we
When-
held off on that.
When would you estimate that we would move on that project?
Next year, it would be on the list then, pending this decision one way or the other with the traffic calming.
And then that would wait until the end of the summer, into the fall season, or would that be able to happen in the spring?
Most likely, we're going to try and bid it out sooner next year than we're getting off to kind of a late start this year. But hopefully, yeah, our tentative timeline would be in that July to August timeframe again for next year.
Okay, so another year from now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to add my thanks to the folks who made the Carnation Festival such a roaring success, to Joe DeMott, the chair, for Leah Dozman, the chair of the parade, marvelous parade. Great weather for a parade this year and a lot of enthusiasm there. I really wanted to recognize and thank our former mayor Gretchen Cerveny for coming to the mayor's reception. That was really it was really great. There were a lot of various events. I want to thank PI Chairwoman Councilor Weaver for I thought that we really should have a pie throwing contest as part of the pie eating contest, but we'll see what the future brings. I want to also thank staff and the police, parks, and public works, all of our dedicated employees for really making that a successful event. I hope all of our citizens and residents were able to get out to the festival and enjoy it, and it'll be back again next year, I hope, knock on wood. So as Mayor Pro Tem Stites said, school is coming back, so please be very careful, drive slowly and carefully as you travel through our town. We've got great youngsters out there and great families that inhabit our community, and we want to make sure that everybody gets home safe and sound at the end of the day. I don't believe we have any more business to come before this council session, but I'm going to recognize Councilwoman Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, one more thing. Our Parks and Recreation Department won the Outstanding Community Award in the parade, so I wanted to mention that and congratulate them, and then also extend my gratitude to Margie Seifer and Millie Nadler for being 2 of the 5 citizen judges, and then Guy Namiash and Ron Benson for announcing the parade. It was very much appreciated, so wouldn't have been able to do that without them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So now, is there any more business to come before our council? We will have a special study session commencing, in about 5 or 8 minutes after this meeting is adjourned. To give us a little break. We'll be back for a special study session, so we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very much. Good evening. I would like to call to order the special study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for August the 14th, 2023. We have one item on our agenda this evening, which is parking and charging for electric vehicles and bicycles. We have already taken public comment on this item prior to during our regular meeting, so we will move right into our staff report on this. And Ms. Mikulak,
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, my comments will be brief before I turn it over to Scott. But this topic originates actually back in April. We were talking to you about parking and bike requirements in mixed-use zones specifically, and got direction to come back to talk about bike parking more comprehensively and EV parking. A couple things have happened since April. Scott Cutler in planning and Mary Hester in sustainability paired up and did some homework on best practices and understanding what our peers are doing. And we had state legislation passed this summer related to EV parking. So it's good timing that we didn't come too quickly back. We have a good understanding what the state rules are, and Scott will be presenting all of that information tonight. We're seeking your consensus and direction on a few code changes. We itemized those out in the memo, and I'll maybe stop there. Turn it over to you.
Thanks. And thanks to Mary for helping me with this report. So I just wanted to give a couple updates, and then I actually have a couple slides. We're going to look at some pictures, and then I'll come back here and finish my presentation. We can go into consensus items. So I'll go ahead and go up there and share the screen. I'm doing the share there. Okay. Great. So thanks, Lauren. I just wanted to start out with a couple of slides to talk through some of the parking and charging requirements for electric vehicles. I don't have slides for bikes. We did try to split those up tonight, but we can kind of pair them together if you'd like as well. I do want to just go into quickly some of our current requirements for electric vehicle parking. And we really don't have any. That's pretty common for the city of Wheat Ridge and other cities in the surrounding area. Yeah. So we've got some work to do. Yeah, so we actually do have a sustainability action plan which was presented to the City Council in 2018. Transportation was one of the main focus of that plan. And one of the goals is to install electric vehicle charging stations throughout the community and to promote the adoption of alternate fuel vehicles in local government, but also the city as a whole, and to reduce vehicle parking requirements, incentivizing bicycle, EV, and shared mobility parking, and to provide secure bicycle storage in new development. So that was a framework for our report today. But like I said, the city does not currently have any EV charging or parking requirements for private developments. That would be Chapter 26, the zoning code. We also don't have any standards for the right-of-way, but for the purposes of tonight, we'll be focusing on private developments. The International Building Code, which the city has adopted, does allow for EV charging, but current building codes that we have do not actually mandate placement, design, or minimum quantities or percentages. So with that, I do want to introduce very quickly House Bill 23-1233, which was passed on in June 2023 by the state legislature, and this actually requires the state electrical board to adopt rules facilitating electric vehicle charging in multi-unit buildings, creates regulations and requirements regarding EV parking. And the state legislation is to further the state's goals related to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and to expand the charging infrastructure necessary to support a growing EV market share. And to that end, the bill mandates that municipalities comply with some of the requirements in the state Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready Code. We are in the very early stages of looking at adopting new building codes, and so I'll get into that a little bit later, but that will be part of the discussion tonight. But there are some portions of the House bill that directly affect what Wheat Ridge will be required to do by the state law. And I just want to quickly summarize it here, and I'll go into more detail in just a minute. But it does mandate that cities adopt the EV charging requirements in the Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready Code. That's a building code. Compliance is required by March 1st, 2024, and those requirements include minimum EV parking requirements. So just to set the baseline, there is actually state legislation that we are going to be required to comply with for EV parking. It also prohibits unreasonable restrictions on tenants and owners for EV parking and charging. The state law actually would prohibit a landlord from not allowing their tenant to install EV charging on the property. And same with owners, an HOA couldn't prohibit someone from installing EV charging on their property. And it also prohibits local governments from banning EV parking and charging. I don't think we were thinking about that, but they went ahead and prohibited local governments from doing that as well. So those are the provisions that really do apply for Wheat Ridge. And before I sit back down and get into some of our recommendations, I do want to show you some of the EV parking charging terms we'll be using tonight. So there are really 3 tiers of EV parking requirements. There's EV capable, EV ready, and EV installed. And they're kind of ramped up in terms of intensity and cost based on what I'll go through. So EV capable is kind of the lightest of all those, and it really is just providing the infrastructure available for future EV installs. In this case, it includes things like conduit to allow for future placement of wires. It requires things like breaker space and junction boxes, but it's not actually any of the wiring or charging infrastructure. And actually, the state of Colorado adopted an even lighter version of this called EV Capable Light, which is only the conduit is being required to be installed. So that's kind of the lightest level of EV infrastructure that is out there today. EV Ready is the middle, and that includes all of the necessary infrastructure and wiring installed, and it terminates in a junction box. I'm not going to begin to tell you what a junction box is, but essentially it is where the wire ends, and eventually someone could come in and install a separate charging station at a later date. Or in the case of a residential context, a garage, it terminates in a 240-volt outlet. That's already pretty common in a residential context for other appliances. And we'll talk about this tonight, but the building code, the state law will actually require that some garage spaces include 240-volt outlets as part of this. And that's also handled through the building code. And last but certainly not least, there's the EV installed infrastructure. And this is a complete charging facility that includes the infrastructure, wiring, and a charging station. These are the big charging units that you see outside of City Hall. These are the ones you see at things like Tesla supercharger stations. And there's also some at the rec center and for Dale Lofts. But this is a commercial grade, essentially, infrastructure that includes a charging unit and a cord and all that stuff. So it's a little bit different than EV Ready, although EV Ready essentially functions as the final step for the residential garage context. And then some terms, level 1 charging, and these are for charging terms. So level 1 is just standard 120 volt power. This is not used for standard EVs, but sometimes is used for plug-in hybrid vehicles. We're not really going to talk about level 1 tonight. That's really actually rare in an EV context. Level 2 is that 240 volt power that I mentioned, and it's already used in some residential contexts for appliances. It's really common for at-home charging of EVs, especially what we would consider a garage EV-ready space, and that can charge in about 12 hours or less. And actually, the chargers at City Hall are considered level 2 chargers, so for our fleet vehicles, it does take basically a full day to charge them. And then level 3 is that rapid charging. It takes about 30 minutes. That is for those commercial freestanding units. They're very expensive to install because it's a totally different realm of electrical connection. And they're always considered to be EV installed spaces. So those are kind of the commercial grade that I was talking about earlier. And just to share some pictures. All that is in the way. So this is an example of a level 2 EV charger installed charger at City Hall. This is a standard 240 volt outlet in a garage, and that's considered a level 2 charger. And then this is actually at Edgewater Marketplace, and this is a level 3 fast charger that's installed in the parking lot there. So I'm gonna go sit back down. So part of our goal tonight was to talk about the requirements of HB 1233 and how they compare to what other communities have already adopted, but also how they would play into things that we're going to have to recommend as code changes to City Council. So we did in the staff report include a sample table of what other communities have already done. So you'll see Lakewood, Golden, Lafayette, Louisville, and Denver all have already adopted EV ordinances requiring parking in certain contexts. It really does vary based on community, and I think some of the intent behind that state law was to have a more streamlined, standardized approach to those requirements because they do really vary, and that just is a pretty inconsistent application. And then there are a lot of other communities in the Front Range that don't have any requirements. So Wheat Ridge is not alone in this, but all these communities are going to have to do something about this, the state legislation. Edgewater is actually working on an ordinance right now as well, and Jefferson County just started an EV action plan that initiated this year. So this is something that is pretty prescient at the moment. So I just wanted to quickly talk about the HB 1233 requirements. They are a bit higher than what our original recommendations were going to be to council. So I just wanted to put that out there as we were just kind of going along with essentially an average of some of the surrounding communities, but those requirements are not going to be, I guess, sufficient. One of the other things we wanted to talk about was the current and future market. And we're really not seeing private investment in delivering EV spaces in new developments, particularly our residential developments. We can't require anything right now, and so that means people are not voluntarily adding. I think we have, you know, a couple of apartment buildings that have EV installed infrastructure or EV ready infrastructure, but really, really small percentage of the overall parking spaces. And we have a lot of highway frontage along Highway 58 and Highway 70. There is a lot of opportunity to look into helping the private market deliver more of those EV charging facilities. Lastly, we also do not have a definition in our code for EV charging, and we don't have a definition for those commercial facilities like a Tesla supercharger station, which is becoming more prevalent nationally. And so one of our recommendations is going to be allowing that type of land use as a permitted use in the city in commercial and mixed use contexts. So with that, I think we should just go into recommendations. Yeah, so we'll just go ahead and get started on recommendations for EV charging. I know there's a lot out there to think about, so we've broken it up into, I believe, five recommendations. I don't know if it's best to just give them all at the same time or do them one at a time. But we are, at least items 1, 2, and 3 are based on requirements in that House bill that we're going to be required to comply with. And so I'll just go into it. For commercial spaces, we are being required to require 2% EV installed spaces. That means there's full charging infrastructure available. 8% of parking spaces are going to have to be EV ready, which would support future charging infrastructure, and they're pre-wired. And then 10% would have to be EV capable. And another 10% is that EV capable light, which is just the conduit into the parking lot area. So that's a pretty large percentage actually being required. That's 30% of all spaces having some level of EV infrastructure. Obviously, the most expensive and the most useful EV installed is a really small percentage, 2%, but that's still a pretty significant change. That is a little bit higher than what we were originally recommending, but not too far off. And then similar requirements were made for multi-unit condo developments. So multi-unit, larger scale residential, 5% EV installed. Again, right now the requirement is 0. 15% EV ready, 10% EV capable, and another 30% EV capable light. And that, my understanding is the numbers are higher for residential because they're making the assumption that people are parking at home overnight and would charge overnight. And multi-unit properties are more likely to have vehicles stored on them for a long term. So I think that's one of the reasons why they're higher. And then the third state requirement is for single unit duplex and townhome developments where residents would already have their own garage, requiring at least one EV ready space in those garages, such as a 240 volt outlet. So that's what we're recommending as well, to comply with that state law. That's actually already was our recommendation before we were made aware of that House bill. And that's something that's people are already doing voluntarily, so that's more common. Our next recommendation is based on EV installations where major additions are occurring on, major redevelopments are occurring. So the House bill does require that if renovations are changing 50% or more of a parking lot area, that we have to require EV parking. But in this case, we already apply some public improvement requirements when there's a 60% increase in floor area. So let's take a shopping center. They're doing a major addition. They would be required to upgrade their parking lot anyway. At this point, we would then be able to require some additional EV parking on a proportional basis. So not saying you have to install the full amount, but just saying that for the amount that you're adding, you would have to provide EV parking on a proportional basis. And then lastly, our recommendation based on EV parking is allowing those freestanding charging facilities in commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zone districts as a permitted primary and accessory use. So those recommendations would require modifications to the zoning code to establish minimum parking requirements, and also some modifications to the building code potentially to define terms and provide those technical requirements. We will need to do some more exploration on what building code amendments or adoption is required, especially because there are some state mandates regarding electrical codes. So with that, I would like to probably pause there and start talking about EV parking and charging. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cutler. Questions from council? Councilor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Has anybody figured out how much this costs to use and who's paying for it?
The charging facilities would be installed by the private developers, so it's not a city-incurred cost. Beyond that, I don't think so. I mean, this is a state mandate, at least part of this. But it would just apply to any new residential development. So that would be built into the cost to construct that new development.
Okay, how about like Foothills Regional Housing? They're going to put that in there too?
So yeah, they would be required if we adopted an ordinance around EV charging, they would have to meet that requirement.
I just know electricity is expensive. And even with XL, we have certain hours we can use electricity and things like this. This doesn't even seem to be an issue about this, especially like what the class 3 or whatever it is that charges in 30 minutes. There has to be a way to figure out how much that is. And I just kind of don't see how the developer's going to be paying for that. How come the people who are using the charging facilities aren't paying for it one way or another?
It's a good question. So the developer will pay for the installation of the infrastructure, and then what we typically see is that the car owner, when they plug in, they have to have an account, and they would pay for it in that way. So like when you use the ones at City Hall, our city attorney can explain, he was plugging in this afternoon. You have to use your own credit card or account to buy that power, the same as you would buy gas at the gas station.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's like a level 2 or something, okay? could take 12 hours to charge. What I'm hearing, people want the ones that charge in 30 minutes.
Yeah, and that's definitely more common in a commercial context. So, for example, a King Soopers might have 4 level 3 chargers in their parking lot that someone can pay to charge while they're in the store, and that is that level 3 that's the quick charging.
I just think it would be interesting to know how much it costs, because we're not talking money here, you know? How much does it cost for 12 hours or 30 minutes or whatever?
I can at least give you sort of the home cost. I have a charger in my house, in my garage, and I've compared as against my XL bill. It costs about 1/3 per mile to drive the car. It costs about 1/3 of the cost it would be for me to buy gasoline and drive the car for that same mile. Because obviously you got to power the car somehow. And powering it on electricity at my residential electric rate is about 30% of what it would cost, 33% of what it would cost if I bought gas and drove the same mile with gasoline at the current prices of gas.
I just know I have a weed whacker and it takes all day to charge the battery.
I had a couple of questions kind of going along that same line. So as I understand it, when you pull up to the charger, you whip out a credit card and you put it in the machine? Is that it?
There are a couple different models for commercial charging. So, for example, there are a couple of big systems. There's ChargePoint and Blink. City is on Blink now. It used to be SemaConnect, but they got absorbed by another provider. And there's 2 ways you can charge. You can pull out a credit card and call an 800 number that's on the little screen there and give the 800 number, and then they will unlock the charger and you plug in. That is charged to your credit card. Or you're a member of these systems and you have a credit card on file, which is what I have for both of those 2 systems. And you have either a little card that it's like you tap it on, like you tap a credit card on a card reader in the supermarket. It reads your card, it knows who you are and what your car is, it unlocks the charger, and then you see that on a credit card bill, just like you'll pay a lot of other things regularly on a credit card bill.
Okay.
So those are the 2 ways commercially that a user like me can charge.
And do we have an approximate cost on what it costs to put either 1 or 2 units in? We've got 2 units out here in our parking lot. How much do you think that it costs us to put those in? That's what we're asking a developer to do, right?
Yeah, Mary, do you remember? Maybe. Yeah, maybe we could get back to you before you.
Because we had, over at the rec center, we put in a charging unit over there too.
We did, and we got grants for them though, so.
You know what, we're not providing grants for developers, are we?
No, we're not, but it's hard to remember because we did
Yeah.
get grants, so it didn't come out of the general fund, and we got grants for the installation, but we also got grants for the equipment.
Uh-huh.
It seems like I was thinking 5,000, 6,000, but I could be totally wrong. I can't remember.
I know the Charterhead Colorado grants that we've gotten covered maybe 90% of the cost, and that's usually around 8,000 to 9,000 per charging station. I'm less familiar with what any of the back end work.
Okay.
And there is some data as well. So there was the different tiers. So EV, I'm blanking on the name now. EV capable spaces, because you're not installing any of the infrastructure, are far cheaper. And so the intent of these and actually the previous city ordinances for the other communities I mentioned, the upfront cost is a lot lower, and then as EV adoption rates rise, those EV capable spaces can be converted over time to be EV installed infrastructure. So that's why the percentage of the really expensive ones are only around 2% right now.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the more challenging components, as I understand it anecdotally, of installing our charging stations is we didn't have that conduit right there. So it's creating these sort of capable spots so that it's cheaper later when we install the bigger price tag charger.
Right. But a lot of these are sort of remote installations. I mean, in a commercial, in a little shopping center, you would need to get power out to the remote area, right? So you,
Yes, usually, I mean, I think that's part of why you sometimes see them closer to the building, where you see them in parking lots. Obviously, the ADA parking is required to be the absolute closest, and then what we've
Right.
seen is that the next closest are the ones that are getting adapted to EV station, or EV parking stalls.
and then I had another question that occurs to me is, who has the right to park in that parking space? Anybody? Or,
There's,
No,
that's the question.
Yeah. I know when you buy an electric car, you have a sticker that goes on the windshield that shows that it's an electric car. And when I park in an EV space, that gives me permission, at least that's been my understanding. There's also, of course, an understanding that you don't just park there. If you're not charging, you should be moving your car. And that's more of a social responsibility than a legal one, I think. But you are issued a sticker that, among other things, exempts you from emission testing because you're not using gas. And so there's a feature of the state licensing system that generates that sticker.
right. But we're not outlawing parking in those spaces by the general public?
I think some cities have provided that that non-EV parking in an EV parking space is another parking violation. It'd be like parking in a no parking zone or a handicap parking space, because you're preventing the intended use of that space.
And then if you park there, are you required to charge?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, yes.
Or do you just have the opportunity to charge?
Well, I'll just give you my own experience, which is typically people want to charge. The whole reason they're parking there is they need to charge. So they really do want the incentive to plug in, as opposed to just have a nice place to park, is the incentive to plug in. And more than half of the time, those spaces are not the most convenient. Very often they're at the end of the parking garage or on the outside of the parking lot, about half of the time. So the real problem is internal combustion engine cars parking in those spaces if they happen to be convenient. And that then defeats the whole purpose.
Right.
And I'm not saying that just because I have an electric car. I've observed that when there are electric cars parked in those spaces, the majority of them are charging because that's why they wanted to be there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. My first comment is thank you, Mr. Cutler, for this presentation. Very thoughtful. Really appreciate the matrix and all the terminology. My question is, I saw that one of them talked about assessing, I think it was like a 2% value of how much charging. And my question, it has to relate to accessibility. So do we need to have, I don't know if this is a law yet, but do we need to have, if there's accessible handicap spaces, do we need to have a charger in one of those spaces to be accessible? And then one of the other ones might be somewhere else.
That's a good question, and actually the state legislation speaks to that a little bit. It's a little bit murky, I think, and so I'd probably want to consult with our building official on what would actually be required from an ADA perspective. I think there's probably a difference between potentially a space for personal use. So if you have a condo, that probably doesn't need to be accessible, but likely a certain percentage will have to be accessible in a commercial context.
Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for this report. I'm generally pretty much in favor of the recommendations coming from staff. A couple things I just want to comment on as the liaison to Sustainable Wheat Ridge. One thing I learned in that committee is that the charging stations at Arvada's Target are actually the most used charging stations in the state. And I bring that up just as people go to charge their cars while they're spending money. And we are on the I-70 corridor. And these charging stations get on maps, especially in publicly accessible commercial spaces. So our report earlier about our sales tax and encouragement from my peers up here on the dais about spending money in Wheat Ridge, actually having accessible charging stations is an economic development strategy, because people really do figure, they figure out where they can go charge their cars and double it up with the trip to the grocery store, grab a bite to eat. So, there's a lot of secondary benefits to our community to having, robust charging infrastructure that's available, not just to our residents, but people who want to come spend money here. And a couple of other things I think about when I'm looking at this, the state's set a very aggressive goal about electrifying transportation and is providing pretty aggressive incentives. I think Colorado is one of the leading states right now in terms of EV incentivization. And when I was looking through this, I kept thinking about the apartment complexes and the multi-unit dwelling. And if we're thinking 10, 15 years down the road, when we've got a significant shift towards more electrification of privately owned vehicles, the accessibility to charging infrastructures in those multi-unit buildings is going to make a difference between, are those like higher end rents, or are those going to be harder to rent? Are we going to be like not having as robust of a market for people living there? So I think the thing I care about the most in this is really looking at the commercial and the multifamily requirements, because those are sort of those longer term and are really making sure that Wheat Ridge, continues to be like an attractive and competitive place for people to call home. Employers, their employees want to be able to charge their cars while they're at work, like our city attorney when he's here. So, there's a lot of secondary things that keep us as competitive employment basis, as a place where people want to call home, a place where people want to spend money. And access to charging infrastructure is really central to that. And if we're not bringing forward the forethought today about what that's going to look like in 15, 20 years, I think we're really disadvantaging ourselves to be competitive, not just today, but in the future. And the cost of retrofitting, as was mentioned earlier, if the infrastructure is not there for the charging systems, the cost to retrofit the infrastructure to be able to add those is going to increase the cost prohibitively. Not prohibitively, but it's going to make it even more expensive. So I recognize there is an upfront cost to our partners who make our city better through developers and private owners, but it's something that's coming, and I think this is an opportunity for us to hedge those costs at the beginning, while really recognizing for us to be the vibrant city in the future that I think all imagine. We talk 50 years down the road. This is more of like a 15 to 20 year down the road, really a 5-year down the road. So I think that getting ahead of this is good, and I'm excited to see these coming forward.
Councilor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While I understand some of the comments that have been made, I have to respectfully disagree with this legislation as a whole, and I'd just like to verbalize a bit of that. I think it is cost prohibitive to require this, and I think it's very counterintuitive to the more urgent issue of affordable housing that we are facing in Colorado. I think this will add significant costs to development, which will then be passed on to the consumer and will drive the costs up even further. I understand that we may be seeing a higher use of electric vehicles, but I don't think it's as mainstream as it's kind of set out to be or perceived, at least currently. And I think anyone that has the money and the privilege to be able to afford an electric vehicle should be able to afford the installation of an EV charging station. And I understand offering some access to that publicly at a cost. I feel like this is encroaching very much on local control, and it's the state overstepping our ability, and we were already going to address this without them requiring it of us, which I would have been a lot more comfortable with, and seeing how it would have best fit within our community. And I also, it's undermining private property rights as well, in the fact that it's limiting a landlord's, a property owner's right to prevent tenants from installing an installation in a home that they don't own. And so as a whole, I feel like this legislation is overreaching, and as a council member in a local municipality with local control, I feel like we should do the bare minimum that the state is requiring of us, and we should not be passing that cost on to developers when we are trying to address and successfully address affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Would we collect a city tax on the energy used on these? I mean,
if energy used through public service, there is a tax on that, which we do get tax for. So I'm assuming
Right.
this would be part of the total utility service in the city when we get tax on that, yes.
so we would levy a tax on the energy used from these charging stations that are commercially, and I'm making a distinction, sort of the ones that are in your garage, which you're going to pay a tax on because that's your energy bill that you're paying to Xcel Energy.
Yeah, and a portion of that tax comes to the city. So
Right.
we don't levy a separate tax.
No,
It's
not
just part of our tax structure today, yes.
Right, but as far as our franchise fee, they agreed to collect that tax and remit it to us.
Correct.
So would they also do that on these other charging stations?
Would they do it with each other?
I mean, yeah, they would levy a tax, they would collect the tax that we're due on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just another power consumption, and it's just part of their overall.
Okay, but I mean, when someone puts their credit card in there, then that credit card that is going to have a tax that gets remitted back to Wheat Ridge? Or does it just go away?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if we know that. That's something we'd have to look into probably
Okay.
further, of the taxing structure. I think, yeah, if in somebody's individual home, I think that's a different situation. It's just part of the total consumption.
Right.
But with a card system, I don't know. That's a good question. We'd have to look into it.
Are these commercial charging stations metered? Do they have an electrical meter connected with them, or I guess
Well,
a way to?
Yes, I mean, it's clear every time you charge a commercial station, you know, because it's on your phone usually, or on the meter, or on the station itself, how many kilowatts you purchased and how many
Right.
kilowatts are in the car. So they absolutely meter the amount of electricity that is delivered, just like the meter in my home and yours.
Right.
Meters the amount of kilowatts you use.
Okay.
So each time you charge, there's a number of kilowatts that you purchase.
Okay.
So I'm assuming that, as Patrick says, it's another user. It's if somebody puts in a big chiller or something and plugs it in and uses a lot of electricity, that's going to show up on someone's meter. And the same is true for the charging stations. There will be a record of it.
So if you were a commercial landlord and you've got 10 tenants in a building, and each tenant's got a sub-meter, and you've got a house meter that's running your parking lot lights and your other equipment, a common area maintenance, will the landlord be able to see and recover the fee that the user is using? I guess he'll be reimbursed for that electricity? Or?
Well, it'd be a matter of how it's metered, no differently than if you're a landlord with an apartment building, there's sub-meters for each apartment, we'll say.
Yeah.
But there is a kind of a building meter for everything else, and that's probably the current pattern. The lights in the parking lot is the best example. Now you put a charging station in the parking lot, and let's say it's on that same circuit. Then the charging out of the electric EV charging the parking lot will end up on the building meter.
Yep.
So to be able to charge it to the individual tenants, you'd need, and I assume it's doable, but you'd need to be able to say, if this is your space, this is now going to be on your sub-meter. That's one way to do it, but obviously not every space is being used for EV. Some form of metering would have to take place, I suppose, if, and again, I'm making this up as I go along, but if there's, 10 spaces in a 30-space parking garage, and they're available to everyone, just as other amenities in the building are available to everyone, whether you use them or not, then that's part of your triple net, probably, as a, that fraction that you
Right.
end up paying that is passed on to you as an individual tenant. And again, I'm trying to sort of invent a billing system to respond to the question you're asking.
Right. Because if someone was like, going to be able to just drive into one of these, and they're out kind of remote, and put your credit card in, and it charges, I guess it charges you for that.
Yeah, if you're using a credit card, yeah.
But the landlord is the actual guy who's paying the usage bill on it. How does he get reimbursed for that?
Well, it's just in the rent, probably.
Yeah.
But it's not a tenant.
Well, I don't think they're going to have, an apartment complex, probably not going to have a charging station that's open to anybody that's going
Well,
to visit,
if
right?
you look at the one we have in our parking lot,
Yeah.
is that on the city's meter?
Yes.
So but anybody could drive in there and put in a card, or is that solely for our employee use?
Well, they're paying for it, so we get reimbursed to cover that cost.
So if I was to drive, if I had an electric vehicle and I drive up and put in a credit card, then you would get
Yes.
money out of that transaction?
Yes.
And I think it's true that the nationwide systems that I use market themselves to locations to say, hey, we would like to put a station in at your location. And I confess, I don't know how they arrange sort of the billing of the metering, but obviously for say if it's a 7-Eleven and they want to put in a charging station for ChargePoint will quite likely pay all the money to install it. And it's like any other service that is offered at that by a third-party provider at that location. Trying to think of other analogies of third-party providers that, if you've got a coffee cart in the lobby of a hospital, okay, they're a third-party provider of a service, and they're paying rent to the hospital to be able to be there. Terrible example, but it's the only one I can think of on the spur of the moment.
It's okay, because they probably wrap that energy charge into either the CAM charge or the rental charge for you to set up your kiosk in there.
Yeah.
And is anyone aware of a sort of a commercial model that's charging, that builds charging stations?
Yes.
Just rows and rows of charging stations.
Yes, so the most famous example would be the Tesla superchargers. So
Okay.
that's the one that's at Edgewater Marketplace. That's actually probably a lease agreement with Edgewater Marketplace, but they do also build, particularly California, Arizona, freestanding charging facilities. So essentially, it's a gas station without a gas pump.
Right.
They're only used for that purpose. They might be in a shopping center or have a convenience store, but their primary function is a freestanding charging facility.
Tesla was looking at the Apple Shopping Center at one point. They were going to put a rapid charging station in. I don't think they are looking at it right now, but they did at one point.
Okay. Additional questions? Councilor Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kind of along those lines, I know, maybe along where the mayor was going here. So there's the ones you have to pay for, right? That's level 3. But if somebody just wants to come in and plug into their spot, like an outlet by their spot, could maybe the landlord, and I'm just asking, be able to charge more for somebody who wants access to those electric spaces? So if I'm a tenant and I drive an electric car, could I pay $50 extra on my rent a month and have access to those spaces, and that pays for the power or something like that? Is that
I think no
feasible?
differently than okay, you want an apartment with a balcony. You want an apartment with a garage. You want an apartment on the third floor near the elevator or not, or whatever's more or less desirable. In terms of the inventory of apartments, that is yet another feature.
Right. So the way I look at it with these additions is, and I agree with almost everything said tonight by everybody, because I tend to fall in the middle on stuff. But I think that we should stick to, just as we're moving forward, the state requirements, because the more that we go above that, we start to toss developers out, and we start to raise the price points, and we start to make ourselves, we put ourselves in competition with our surrounding cities as far as development and things like that go. So I would like to stick with what is required by the state, although I do think it is, if I drive around my neighborhood, 5 years ago, there's one electric car. I drive around my neighborhood now, there's electric cars everywhere. But I live in a different neighborhood than what we're talking about here. So I think it's important that we look to the future, but I think it's also important that we don't encumber our future landlords with expenses that we don't need. But it makes me feel better knowing that they can recoup some of those costs by charging for that. And it's something that I think people are going to be looking for in the future. If you're looking for an apartment and you can afford it, and you're looking for a townhome or whatever it is, and you can find something that's EV capable and you want an EV car, you might be willing to pay extra for that just to have that availability. So as I said, I think this is something valuable that we need to make sure that we add on, but I think this is something that we need to stick to the standard that the rest of the state is playing by as well. Thank you.
Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. My direct experience is that the new apartments are having garages that are EV capable with that infrastructure, and they are paying a premium for that. And surprisingly, it's a high number of garages that are doing that. From what I can see is that we're kind of an island where we have Lakewood, Golden, Denver. I don't know if Arvada is going to make this list soon, but it seems that if we don't do something, that there's definitely an incentive to go to other communities for the EV charging, and that Wheat Ridge needs to be, in that mix. And my experience is that what I'm not hearing from developers, at least in Denver, and I don't know where Denver ranks on this list as far as are they at state level, are they above state level, is that dealing with the EV cost is not the issue. The issue that I hear from most developers nowadays is time for staff review. That is the most important, is staff turnaround on review. It is not EV charging station. That is not something that I hear that it is an issue. And so it just seems like it's not an issue, but there's definitely a demand in it. And the demand for the EV charging station, it seems like, has mostly been brought up by the municipalities, not so much the state. And so I feel like we're kind of, this is where we're at, but we're kind of lagging, so to speak, in terms of having that capabilities. And I'm really excited that we're having this conversation, for, against, somewhere in the middle. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. But I really appreciate Mr. Culler, taking a look at that matrix. But I do want to know where, are we going to be competitive if we just meet the state? Are we, do we need to go, what are our neighbors doing? Is Denver certain percentage X way above what the state is? Is Lakewood, Golden? I'd like to know where, if we do just the state, where do we fall with our neighbors? Because I do feel that we should be somewhere pretty close to what our neighbors is. We don't have to be the highest of our neighbors, but we should be somewhere in that mix, that if the state is really low, that I don't know that I would be supportive of that compared to our following neighbors. There is incentive. We should be trying to provide some type of incentive to come to Wheat Ridge and shop in Wheat Ridge. And when I hear things about Target is the most used, it's like I'd like that to happen in Wheat Ridge, where people are coming to Wheat Ridge to shop, and if it takes a couple EV charging stations, then I think that I would be supportive of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Weaver.
I just have a couple comments. I think it's something we should move towards, definitely. I'm a little concerned about some larger issues ahead that is a little bit beyond this conversation, but I do think we should think about in sort of the vein of sustainability. And the first one is, well, to answer your question, Mayor, yes, you can meter things separately. So I do that at the farm. I meter different buildings that have electricity going to them. And I also, though I don't have an electric vehicle because it's not an efficient thing for farms yet to have those kinds of vehicles, I use a lot of electricity. And I'm actually electricity shamed quite often by Excel. In other words, I get this letter that says you use 90% more electricity than all of your neighbors. I know that. I'm running a farm, and unfortunately the incentives for me to do solar are not appropriate for me to get there yet. I'm a little concerned about this threshold that we're going towards of everyone charging cars at their house and the amount of electricity we're using, and sort of what that looks like in the sort of overall balance of wanting people to use electricity, and to Ms. Hutchinson's point, peak hours and all of those things that we're sort of talking about on the other side of the sustainability coin. And I was just kind of curious, Scott, if any of this legislation kind of deals with the other side of, of electricity and usage and load, and how all those things are managed when we're pushing out these spigots of huge amounts of energy, and how that sort of gets balanced in the long term. I realize that's a big question, so if you don't want to answer it, it's okay. I sort of just wanted to put it out there.
Yeah, I probably won't answer that fully, but I mean, it wasn't mentioned in the state legislation. That said, I think the intent of the state legislation is that all these requirements are designed to be adopted gradually, because the percentage of EV installed spaces are still right at 2%. It's a really small percentage of the overall requirement is actually having the infrastructure.
Okay.
The rest of it is getting stuff ready for the future. And at that point, Excel, I mean, that's just way beyond the city and me, so, yeah.
Get it. I'm going to keep getting shamed for a while then. The other part of this was that I'm trying to understand how the stations work. It's like a spigot, I get that. You put a card in, I get that. But there's a middle person. There's a middleman who's making money, because it's not just Excel, because I'm paying Excel at home. So if there's a middleman, and I'm assuming there's 3 companies or whatever out there, they should be paying tax, local tax, because I'm paying tax on food. People are paying tax on things coming from the farm. We're charging sales tax for everything in this city, including delivery. Excuse me, okay. Still confused on that one. I'm not delivering things anymore because of that, but so I do feel like, yes, I think it's important to move towards this. I don't like how I'm getting shamed for using electricity, and other people are being pushed towards using electric cars, if that makes any sense. There's not a balance of what sustainable means, and so I do feel like an electrical pump should be taxed the same as a gas pump in a local environment. I agree with everything else. I think it should be part of our infrastructure. I think that's where we're going, but I don't think that it should have special status, because for me, it's not a working possibility even for me to consider an electric vehicle for what I do. And so it feels a little like I'm continually sort of justifying why I'm not using an electric vehicle, and for lots of reasons I'm not. Sort of the same, I guess I'm using the examples of the electrical shaming because I feel like there's an imbalance. So I am for this, however, I am for going forward and treating them similarly to how we deal with, how we sell other things that have middlemen, which we call retail, in the city. I think that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to just call attention here that I think we're kind of all over the place in this conversation, and bringing it back to what we're looking at and what would we be requiring for our buildings and our sites to be EV ready. And I know the state's actually working on its EV readiness plan. It's in the process right now of updating its greenhouse gas roadmap 2.0, and a lot of these strategies are within that. But like within our city and what's in front of us here is, and we've touched on it a couple of times, there's actually very minimal requirements about actually having like the charging stations installed. What we're really addressing here is making sure that when new construction is built, that the conduit's in place. Because going back and retrofitting that conduit is extremely expensive. My next door neighbors who had lived in the house for 50 years, my sweet old ladies, and they recently sold the house and moved to South Carolina for retirement. And they, meticulous homeowners, and their real estate agent told them the only thing they needed to do to sell the house was get an EV-ready charger in it. And so they spent a lot of money to get that EV charger in, because their target market and the people who bought the house was a cute young couple, and one of them has an EV car. So a lot of what we're talking about here isn't mandating a lot of expensive charging stations. It's requiring that when people are building things in our community that are going to be here long-term, that what they're doing is getting them ready so that as the state does its longer-term strategy and as adoption comes up and as hopefully prices come down. And I'll just point out, sitting on, if Val were here, if Ms. Messler-Beck were here, you know, there's eight counselors, and 2 of us drive EVs, three drive EVs, and I drive an e-bike. And we're just, you know, a sampling of our community. So I think, you know, I'm very aware as a former real estate developer that things like this do add cost, but it's a market, you know, direction that's going, and this isn't super aggressive. We're not requiring a lot of charging stations. We're looking at making sure that the infrastructure is in place so that as it becomes appropriate and the opportunities are there, we're not seeing these prohibitive costs for commercial developments and multifamily to be able to retrofit that, because that's when it gets really expensive. So one thing I'd like to propose, if it is more comfortable, or maybe staff can help with the single unit duplex and townhome requirements that you have recommended here, is that consistent with the state's recommendation?
It is, and it was a recommendation before
Okay.
we read the state legislature as well.
Okay. Well, I think the only 2 places where I see some squish room would be that location, or that one item, which we're hearing is the state's going to be requiring that anyway. And then the major additions is kind of a retrofitting. And that seems like that might be a space where we maybe have a little bit more flexibility. What does that look like in compliance with the state's requirements?
So the only state requirement related to retrofitting was that 4A in the recommendations, which is that if you are essentially demoing and rebuilding 50% or more of your parking lot, that's considered a new parking lot and you meet all of the minimum requirements. Our recommendation was related to a little bit separate, where if you're redeveloping a property and you're doing a major addition, a 60% increase in floor area, which is already codified, that's when the city's requirements for things like public improvements take place. Is that it? Yeah, but public improvements. So that's a very significant investment. And so they would then also potentially be required, based on our recommendation, to do a proportional increase in EV spaces. So if they have 0 and they're doing a 60% addition, they would have to add EV spaces based on the amount of the addition area, not the total site. So that's already how we do it with public improvements, and our thought process was similar. We don't want to punish someone for reinvesting in their properties, but we still have to require some amount of reinvestment in EV. The state requirement is related, but actually a little bit separate from number 4.
So could we evaluate in that situation to just require an EV-capable light if they're doing that significant of a reinvestment instead of the EV ready and EV installed?
I mean, I think that's up to you all. It's
I'm
certainly
just checking it
possible.
against requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would want to ensure that we're still in compliance with state requirements in that case, but I think my understanding is that the renovations of the parking lot is when the parking lot itself is actually being demoed and replaced, not necessarily related to additions. So I think it probably would be compliant, but we would have to check on that.
Okay. So just checking with my peers, would that be a compromise that we would feel comfortable with that is reducing the undue cost requirements for reinvestment in the city if we switch to an EV light requirement for reinvestment? So for number 5, which is the significant reinvestment requirement, I'm sorry, number 4, I love my bifocals. So what's currently written is that the threshold of expansion resulting in 60% increase of the floor area would trigger the other required public improvements with all those different tiers. And what I'm suggesting is that with that, we would just look at the EV light, which would require bringing in the conduit, which is a very expensive aspect of retrofitting, but wouldn't require the additional wiring or any of the other readiness. So do I have consensus for that?
2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like there's consensus there.
All right, and then I'd like to ask for consensus to approve 1, 2, and 5 as written. 1, 2, 3, and 5 as written. Yeah, we just revised number 4 to downgrade it. Yeah, 4 was the one we just revised, so 1, 2, 3, and 5 as written.
Well, we have 3 in favor.
No, those are only meeting, those recommendations are just meeting the minimum, the state requirements.
Yeah, so 1, 2, and 3 are meeting the minimum state requirements. We're not proposing to exceed them. Sorry, I can't hear everyone.
Are we supposed to make a consensus on 1, 2, or 3? How do we do that if we're already required to do that?
We're required to update the zoning code to implement that state law. So we'll need to bring an ordinance forward so that our local codes are amended to mirror the state law. And we also need to establish how we apply that, to projects that are in process.
Yeah, so we're asking for consensus. I mean, we're not proposing or recommending that you go below the state minimum, but we still need a consensus from council to move forward with either the state minimum or something in excess.
Okay, I'm not sure council understood that. I'm going to try that again. Okay, so we're just going to work on 1, 2, and 3. So 1, 2, and 3 has already been passed by the state, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we can have consensus on it, but if we don't have consensus on it, it doesn't really do anything since the state's already passed it.
Or I guess our question is, do you want to do more? The consensus is just keep it at the minimum, or do you want to do more?
Okay, so the option is keep it at what 1,
This-
2, and 3 are stated at?
Yes.
Or do more?
Yes.
And I had a question about if it's EV installed, is it EV installed as a level 1 installation, where it's a 120-volt circuit, or is it EV at a 240 volt at whatever amperage you need? Do you know what the amperage draw on these? Is this like a 30 amp circuit or 40 amp or?
I don't have the data on the amperage, but EV installed is level 2 or level 3.
Okay, so it's.
And some communities micromanage that a little bit, where if you provide a certain percentage of level 3, then you get credit, and that's getting pretty complicated. The state doesn't require that. It's just saying you've got to have EV ready, and we don't care if it's level 2 or level 3.
Okay, and level 3, you can charge in 30 minutes, so that must be a pretty significant demand.
It is, and those are generally the commercial context. So a multi-unit apartment building would not have a level 3 typically, but a Tesla supercharger or something at a grocery store, the Target ones are level 3 Edgewater Marketplace, but those are generally only provided in a commercial context.
Okay. And would EV Ready, does that include a panel and wire size and electricity to the structure that would allow you the amperage to get up, in a
Yes. So that's everything but the charging unit.
unit itself? Okay. Okay. Any additional questions? Okay, Councilor Hutchinson.
When I'm looking at 1, 2, and 3, it says in bold, new multi-unit, new single unit, duplex and townhomes. So this wouldn't be an issue if somebody wanted to sell their house, that, if you want to sell it, you need to put in a EV thing.
Correct, yeah, only new development.
And another item that I keep thinking about, I've seen a lot of changes with cars and things like that. We have no idea what 15 years from now is going to be. So it could be totally different of how these things are, charged or whatever. I'm just not being pessimistic, I'm being realist, because it happens all the time. And you install these things, and then in 10, 15 years, you can't use that. You have to have something else, And it's so expensive. So, that's just my concerns. We see things change all the time. You can look at lawnmowers. That's pretty simple. And they change.
Thank you. Councilor Weaver.
I'm just getting really tired, and I want to try and understand what we're supposed to pass here for a consensus, because I feel like my colleagues and I are confused. 1, 2, and 3 are what the state has passed. We can't do anything less than that, correct? We can't take away from anything that's written in 1, 2, or 3. The only thing we can do is more.
And that's the consensus we want, that you don't want to do more, I guess.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Correct.
I feel like
Yes. We're
I'm also
recommending you do
confused.
the minimum, what the state's requiring.
Right,
Our
but we're not
consensus-
allowed to do anything less than the
Correct,
minimum.
correct.
So
So
either
the
we're,
consensus is stay with the minimum.
okay, so for 1, 2, and 3, we have, if we don't want to do anything more than these, we still have to come to consensus. What if we don't, right? Because we raised our hands and only half of us raised our hands. So what if we don't have consensus on them?
Well, we'll bring it back in ordinance because we have to follow state law.
Right, right.
But we won't add anything else to it. We won't add any more. We'll keep it at the minimum. So it's kind of in reverse. Again, our consensus is you don't want to add anything more than what the state's requiring. Is that true?
Do we have a consensus on that for 1, 2, and 3? Okay, so we've gotten through that.
Yes.
So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 now. 5?
Well, no, just a minute. You had 1, 2, and 3. You've got consensus.
We already did 4. We did 4 with Rachel's consensus.
I'd like to ask for a consensus on number 5 as written.
So
And it's permitting, it's just a permittable use, right?
Right, and so I just had
Yes.
a question in regards to that. So that it's, because it's not expressly allowed in the code, then it's prohibited. So if we, okay, because
Or
that whole
subject to a
silent
similar
language
use.
thing, which
Yeah.
I completely disagree with as well, so. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. Our code says if it's not expressly allowed, it's prohibited unless it's substantially similar to something that's allowed. And these animals are pretty unique and new, so it's probably not substantially similar.
So if we were to allow these in commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zones as a permitted primary and accessory use, then we could have these sort of charging garages, charging arrays.
It would be like a gas station, but electric instead of gas. So
Okay.
permitted use.
So that's the primary, and then the accessory is there's already a use there, and they want it King Soopers wants to install 10 charging stations and that's considered accessory.
Right.
So we're recommending both be allowed. And that's similar to other communities have already done that.
And would there be a limit on the number of charging stations that one could put in a particular lot?
No, we're not proposing that.
No, you'd have setback requirements, et cetera. Probably the best analogy is if I wanted to build a gas station there, how many pumps would I be able to get on that site, given the amount of land I have and the setbacks for a gas station? And I would think, I don't want to speak for Lauren and Scott, but I think it would be the same thing. It's really how big is the site and what do the setbacks say?
Right.
And imagine that you wanted to put a gas station in there to be the same set of considerations.
Yeah. But a parking space is 7.5 by 18 feet, so you could have a lot of them in the area that you could put in a gas station.
Yeah, sure, yeah, probably so.
Mhm.
You're using your space budget, for lack of a better way of saying it, differently, but you've got the same space budget on that site.
Okay. Then would we then do rulemaking to put the setback requirements and all of those for that use in all of these permitted districts?
We wouldn't need to add too many more development standards. We'd probably apply similar standards that we have relative to parking lots, which have screening requirements and landscaping requirements. Yeah, the economics of it are probably not going to yield a lot of big charging parking lots just because of the land basis. That's why we haven't seen one. I think it's part of why the Tesla one went away. The Regency could make more revenue, doing fast food there instead of a parking lot. But it won't, making this change would not preclude that from happening.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stites, sorry.
Can I have a consensus that we move forward on number 5?
Oh, okay. All right.
Thanks.
What else did you have on? Is that it for EV charging?
It is, and we do have bikes as well. That one's a lot quicker.
Darn.
That's what you think.
Okay. Move to
Shall we proceed? Okay, I will proceed. All right, so bike parking, just want to give a little bit of an overview. So with the mixed-use ordinance that you all saw back in June, we did update bicycle parking requirements to be higher, to be in line with surrounding community requirements based on the number of vehicle parking spaces required. Those changes only applied to the mixed-use code. They don't apply to the rest of the city, about probably 90% of the rest of the city, which has different zone districts. And so we're back here to talk a little bit more specifically about bicycle parking spaces. So with that, there is a really big difference in the typical outdoor URAC bicycle parking space versus a secured indoor facility. URACs are really reasonable for temporary bicycle parking, especially if they're placed at a building entrance or in front of a bar or restaurant, but they're not good for long-term bicycle storage, particularly due to things like theft issues. So long-term bicycle parking can come in the form of a covered and gated storage unit outside, bicycle lockers, or bicycle storage rooms within buildings or parking garages. Some new apartment developments in Wheat Ridge have voluntarily provided these as a incentive to get their residents to use them. Weston 38 and Parallel, and I believe the picture in the code, in the staff report is from Parallel. But others have specifically said, we won't provide this unless you will require us to. And we can't require it, and so they won't do it. The one in Parallel actually also provided a workshop and electrical outlets as well, specifically to charge EV bike batteries. That's not a code requirement of the building code or city code, but is something, according to our building official, that is permitted, but again, it's voluntary. So just want to give a really quick outline of some of the surrounding bicycle parking requirements. Most surrounding communities do require some form of long-term bicycle storage for residential uses. Smaller number also require long-term bike parking for commercial or educational uses. Some communities may require things like shower and changing facilities and employment buildings over a certain size, paired with some vehicle parking reduction incentives. And Wheat Ridge actually does provide allowances for reduced vehicle parking already if bike parking beyond the minimum parking requirement is provided. So there is a pretty wide range of required long-term bicycle parking spaces in the metro area. Denver and Arvada require 1 in 5 bicycle spaces for apartments to be long-term, so secured indoor bike parking spaces. But in some more urban zone districts in Denver, that's actually up to 4 in 5 spaces to be indoors, not outside. And that's because there's not a lot of land outside. It's actually taken up almost all by a building, and so those spaces have to be in the building. In Lakewood, they already require that half of bicycle parking needs to be long-term indoor bike parking. And so these generally result in what we'll see like at Parallel, those small bike parking rooms, or sometimes an enclosure within the gated parking garage as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about EV bikes and storage? So city does have legislation already around e-bikes. The point of tonight is to not really talk through e-bikes and their uses, but just know that we do already allow and regulate Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes as regular bicycles in the city. And we know that with recent local and state incentives that e-bikes are becoming more and more prevalent. Personally know a lot of people that are getting e-bikes. It's a really new phenomenon. Communities do not address the need for electrical outlets in these bike storage rooms. And the building code also does not mandate them. And there's no specific need to make changes to the zoning code in this regard. Zoning is really related to use and development, but it is something that we could discuss in the 2024 IBC update if we did want to mandate charging outlets in a bike storage room. Those are not like EV batteries. They can be charged in a regular outlet. You don't need specialized infrastructure in that case. So we are making a few recommendations. We do recommend increasing the bike parking requirement found in 26501 to align with the recently updated requirements in the mixed use code. We're also recommending requiring secured indoor bicycle storage for apartment developments or multi-unit residential developments over 50 dwelling units in this way. One, that 50% of all required bicycle parking must be long-term storage indoors. That's similar to the Lakewood requirement. If they're already building a parking garage, which implies a more urban or dense context, then that would actually increase to 75% of all required bicycle parking be indoors. And this requirement would not exclude the fact that we would still need some minimum exterior parking for bikes, like a U-rack on the street. And then our last recommendation is that there are some additional vehicle parking reduction incentives for office and institutional uses up to an additional 10% if things like secured indoor bicycle storage is provided or shower and changing facilities are provided. And again, this third recommendation is only for an office or institutional use. Number 2 is related to a residential context. Thanks.
Okay. Discussion on the bikes. Councilor Weaver?
I would really appreciate it if our resident expert would put forth her opinion on e-bikes and what would be recommended, because I think this has been a great conversation, and I think we definitely need space for e-bikes. I just don't have an idea of how much we need, so I'd like to yield to my colleague.
Let's go to Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you. I will be brief. So I think, Mr. Cutler mentioned there's, e-bikes are on the rise, and with the incentives coming forward from the state starting next year, they're only increasing. I rode home today next to a guy named Ray, who is a construction worker. He lives at 44th and Kipling and works downtown, and his car crapped out last year, and he can't afford $4,000 to fix it, so he got an e-bike and has been riding an e-bike to his construction site round trip. So it's a transportation equity issue also. There are people who are opting for e-bikes, not like me who has the privilege, but because it's their form of transportation. So one of the biggest barriers that a lot of people have for being able to feel like an e-bike is an option for them is safe storage and charging. And if you don't live in a single family home, then being able to carry an e-bike, which oftentimes weighs in excess of 45 pounds, upstairs into, you know, secured places is like really, really difficult, physically impossible for a lot of people. So being able to provide long-term storage for bikes, and increasingly those are e-bikes, which are more expensive and much more likely to be stolen, is, you know, again, it's just something people are going to want and expect. And we're going to have more and more people riding e-bikes. So giving them a safe place to store them is, you know, I think reasonable. And we're seeing more and more bikes parked outside of businesses. And I don't know if y'all noticed at the Carnation Festival how many people rode their bikes to get there. So, so I think, you know, being able to address these, again, we're meeting a need that's already here. And when we talk about cost burden of both housing and transportation, e-bikes are something that are really helping people address both. So I think these are great, and they're in line with what our neighboring communities are doing, and I support them as written.
Councilor Dozman?
You said that we already offer incentives for offering this kind of bike storage, correct?
Not for bike storage. The only incentive that Wheat Ridge allows is if you provide a lot of extra bicycle parking, then you can reduce a couple of vehicle parking spaces, but that's the only incentive we have in our code right now.
And in that design, is it typically outdoor bike parking, or what would that look like generally?
Currently, it's just outdoor bike parking.
Okay. Have we I don't know, studied the costs of adding these storage units?
We have not personally, but like I said, a lot of developers are already doing this, so it's not to them perceived as a burden because they're already doing it.
Okay, so if they're already doing it, then why would we be requiring it?
I think our recommendation is because Wheat Ridge is one of the only communities that doesn't already require this, and some out-of-state developers have specifically said if you're not going to require it, we're not going to do it. I think it's a really big missed opportunity to have, we know we have so many apartment buildings in our pipeline right now for development, to say, hey, okay, you don't have to provide any bike storage like you would if you had to build in Lakewood, or you would if you had to build in Denver. I think it just puts us behind to not require it.
Could we offer incentives to offer it as opposed to requiring it?
I can't speak to that personally. I don't think that's something other communities do.
Do you mean like further reduce the vehicle parking if additional
Yeah, or
storage is provided?
offer some other incentive so that if it's not so costly to add that storage, then they would be inclined to do so as opposed to requiring it.
I mean, I don't personally have an opinion on that. I don't know. That's just not something I came across in my research.
And then, so as far as the memo goes with bike parking and storage, what other communities are either addressing this right now or already address it and require it?
I think pretty much all of the surrounding communities require long-term bicycle parking. Wheat Ridge is an anomaly in that we don't require any, and our numbers are way below what other communities require just for outdoor bicycle parking. So we're, honestly, decades behind other communities in terms of what we already allow and don't allow.
And so this would be mostly affecting multi-unit residential over 50 units? Or is that the threshold, or?
Yes, that's our recommended threshold. Council could say, I want this to apply to all apartment buildings regardless of number of units. We're seeing these more likely to be provided in big buildings. I actually live in a building that is 50 dwelling units and has a bike storage room, and it was used, essentially a leftover space was created to be bike storage. So it doesn't seem to affect like a floor plan or anything like that. But that's because I live in Denver, and that's a requirement by Denver that buildings over a certain amount of units have to provide bicycle parking inside.
So what developments in Wheat Ridge would trigger this threshold requirement?
I think a lot. I mean, Weston 38, a bunch of units in the pipeline. Outlook 2 at Clear Creek Crossing, which is under construction, would have had to meet this requirement. Outlook 1, which is already there. 44th and Kipling has multifamily in the pipeline. I mean, we've got American Motel. I mean, we've got probably 6 apartment buildings in the pipeline that would have to meet this requirement.
So, and this would only be applied like in the future. It wouldn't apply retroactively. So Weston 38th wouldn't fall
Correct.
within that.
Although
right?
they already have a bicycle.
They do. Yeah. I
But
recognize
Outlook
that.
does not, but would have had to meet that requirement. They were ones that said, we're not going to do it unless you make us.
Okay. Thank you.
Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. I typically see the multifamily with the bike barns providing bike storage, not necessarily e-bike, but given the Colorado, we have a lot of either, a lot of UV sun or, we have snow and rain, that there's would definitely be a benefit to have people who use e-bikes have a nice, kind of warm, clean, dry space with electric. My question, so that's my comment. My question, though, is that I kind of see, my perception is I see, a bicycle, which is something that I have, that has to be pedaled on a different playing field than an e-bike. Generally, if I wanted to get on my bike and really commute to work, it's going to be a very, very, very long commute versus the e-bike. And so what I wonder, and if you've considered, is could there be a different ratio? Like right now, there's a typical, so many bikes might get you a couple reduced parking, which I understand, but I feel like e-bikes is a different equation. There should be a different standard. Maybe Councilmember Halteen could chime in, but that if you're really using e-bikes and you're commuting at, longer distances, and that's usually what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing e-bikes used generally for recreation, that would be an added incentive. I still feel strongly that we should be mandating, the bike barn or the storage, and having the electrical charging stations in those, either one of those areas. But as far as reducing some parking to incentivize it because you're using an e-bike is something I'd like to have Councilmember Halteen weigh in.
Can I make a comment first, if you don't
Yes,
mind?
go ahead.
I think, I thought about that when we're doing research, and the main thing is that the e-bikes that are allowed in Wheat Ridge are not regulated any differently than regular bicycles, and to store them generally indoors, they're not so different. I know e-bikes can be a little bit larger, but it would be impossible for someone to know how many residents in a building would be using an e-bike versus a regular bicycle, because the storage, the way they're locked to the wall, is the same. Unless we really wanted to micromanage, I just haven't seen that come up in other legislation at all.
Thank you. I've got Counselor Weaver next.
Could you just explain a little bit more on what the requirements are? Because I think we've just been talking about charging stations that are tens of thousands of dollars, and just to understand what a bike barn is and what this minimum requirement that isn't that expensive. While I realize there are very nice things where they have individual lockers and charging stations and all of that, you're basically saying they need a space that's dry, lockable, possibly has some electrical plugs. Could you just talk about that? Because I'm hearing that it's not really an onerous requirement, but it's a requirement that we need to have for it to happen in buildings, which I am for, because I think if you've ever carried a bike to a third floor, even on an elevator, it is such a not fun thing to do. And it would be the difference between somebody moving to Wheat Ridge or moving to a neighboring community. So could you just talk about that? What these spaces can look like?
Yeah, there's a wide variety. So the picture in the staff report is kind of the most expensive, option, in that it's an indoor finished space with lights, plugs, all that. We have seen, I think Weston 38 has just a couple of parking spaces in their parking garage that are fenced off with key access for residents and some bike racks inside. That's a way lower, I guess, impact to a developer. They built a lot of parking, and so they used a couple spaces for that. Seen things, even like a outdoor, covered, still exposed to the elements, but gated. So like almost like a gazebo type structure. So a really wide range would all meet these requirements, and Lakewood, Arvada have similar requirements where kind of any one of those could meet the standard.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Cutler's comments. I mean, it's really hard to differentiate demand between e-bikes and analog bikes just based on, you know, its individual preferences. But I want to just kind of broaden our understanding of who might have need for this kind of bike storage. You know, as far as e-bikes go, seniors are actually one of the big adopters of it. And also people who need adaptive technologies for getting around. But we also live in Colorado. A lot of people we're talking about have mountain bikes, expensive mountain bikes, because they like on their weekends to throw those bikes on their cars and go ride on the mountains. So the types of people or the types of bike that really I think are what we see in our community a lot. We shouldn't just be thinking about people like me who use their bike for transportation. Recreational bikes, seniors, families. And the reason e-bikes become important is they do, you know, they're more expensive. They have different storage needs. You want to keep them inside. They need to be charged. But right now, they're also the biggest growth area in the bike industry. So the biggest bike adoption, and I've just been casually paying attention when I'm riding my bike around town. I would say probably, I'm going to say close to half of the bikes that I see riding around, at least on the west side of town, are actually e-bikes. So this is why the storage, I mean, regardless of e-bikes, we're behind our neighbors. Mandating it, I think, is really helpful. But the reason e-bikes are part of the conversation is that they're a huge growth area. We're seeing more and more of them, and they just have unique needs to analog bikes. So we should be thinking about our bike storage requirements to actually work for e-bikes. In general, realizing that we're going to see a lot of mountain bikes and analog bikes and really cute little kids' bikes too, hopefully. That's my bike thoughts.
Thank you. Councilor Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make it quick. I think that because and I agree with Mr. Cutler, because we're so far behind, I think for the same reason I don't think we should go over and above on the EV stuff with the cars. I think that we need to catch up with our neighbors because we're not competitive. I think that nobody is going to not sign a lease in an apartment because they have bike storage, but there's a lot of people who will not sign a lease in an apartment because they don't. And I think we're looking at parking requirements for our affordable housing. We're looking at parking requirements for a lot of our businesses and all of that. So as we're trying to get rid of parking spots, we might want to also be looking for other ways for people to get there. So putting these requirements in seems to make sense to me. So thank you.
Mr. Cutler, would we, in your recommendations, would we reduce the amount of vehicle parking required if we had indoor bicycle storage?
That's not part of this recommendation.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
I'd like to ask for a consensus to adopt the proposed changes that staff has outlined in the memo. So for number 1, 2, and 3 as written.
Looks like we have consensus on that. And just to clarify, these were for new multi-unit residential developments, not for existing ones.
Correct, yeah, only new construction.
Okay. Okay. Did you have additional items on the bicycle?
That is all I have.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, that looks like that concludes item number 1 on our special study session. Staff reports, Mr. Goff.
Nothing else this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. We go to elected officials reports. Any additional elected officials reports? Okay, very good. Well, all right, so it looks like we've got this about wrapped up on our special study session. Thank you very much, great discussion. We were back here next week in a study session. Okay, so thank you all for joining us, and we will stand adjourned.